I'm going to hand over to Dame Rosie for the rest of the business.
Order. We now come to Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill, Programme number 2. Programme motion, Minister to move. The question is, as on the order paper. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The clerk will now proceed to read the orders of the day.
Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill, Committee.
Move forward.
No. Before the House resolves itself into committee, I draw the House's attention to the instruction motions on the order paper. They are subject to selection by the Chair, and Mr. Speaker has decided to select the motions in the name of Secretary Kemi Badenoch to allow the committee to make provision in the bill for it to extend to Northern Ireland, and in the name of Marion Fellows to allow the committee to make provision in the bill for it to make provision relating to Scotland. I first call Minister Kevin Hollinrake to move the instruction motion relating to Northern Ireland.
I beg to move.
The question is that it be an instruction to the committee on the Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill that it has power to make provision in the bill for it to extend to Northern Ireland. As many as are of that...
Stephen Farry,
I'm so sorry. Stephen Farry.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. I just wanted to extremely briefly put on record on behalf of the Justice Minister, First Minister and Deputy First Minister, and indeed Northern Ireland MPs, our gratitude to the Minister and the Government for listening to the arguments that we put forward and including Northern Ireland in the bill. It has made an enormous difference and we are extremely grateful. I just wanted to make sure that was properly placed on record. Thank you.
Gavin Robinson.
If you'll allow me just to agree with the Honourable Member for North Down and thank the Minister for reaching this point. There has been a considerable effort across the House and there has been a great collaboration across all parties. The Honourable Member mentioned most particularly the First Minister, the Deputy First Minister, the Justice Minister of Northern Ireland and indeed all Northern Ireland MPs. You can see are on the paper before the committee that we shall consider. All were agreeable to this aspiration. It is right that in a UK-wide system Northern Ireland was included in it and the outcome should benefit our constituents most deeply affected by the Horizon scandal.
The question is that it be an instruction to the Committee on the Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill that it has power to make provision in the bill for it to extend to Northern Ireland. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. The contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to the instruction motion on the order paper in the name of Marion Fellows to allow the committee to make provision for Scotland. I call Marion Fellows to move the instruction motion.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And at the outset, can I say, if I cry this afternoon, it won't be because I'm upset, it'll be because I'm angry and I am feeling got at by other parties in this place who are determined not to introduce Scotland into this bill. This morning, 3 sub-postmasters, Robert Thompson, Chris Dawson and Keith McEldowie, travelled from Scotland to be here to sit there and listen to the reasons why Scotland should not be included in this bill. Unfortunately, there were 2 urgent questions and a statement and a train breakdown. They couldn't be here and now they've had to go back before they could look at the people in this House who hold the fate of their exoneration in their hands. Madam Deputy Speaker, there are huge legal misgivings and potential constitutional implications in this bill. This has been the case and has been spoken about by legal authorities across the United Kingdom. However, to use the Minister's own words, we recognise that this is an exceptional step, but these are exceptional circumstances. Postmasters across the United Kingdom want this exoneration bill to succeed, as do those of us on these benches. It must succeed, and we need to get the exoneration through this place in order that convicted sub-postmasters across the United Kingdom can claim compensation and redress for what they have suffered. Madam Deputy Speaker, I have in front of me the witness statement from Robert Thompson, who had to sit down and talk to his 2 young sons during his court case and tell them there was a real possibility of him having to go to prison. How awful is that? How awful is that for all the other sub-postmasters who had to go through that very same experience? Why should... Yes.
Thank you very much, Mr Deputy Speaker. Can I thank my honourable friend for giving way? She talks about going to prison. My constituent lost her liberty, her good name, her house, her marriage, her family, her whole existence with this situation. She's had to move to my constituency, set up life on her own. Now, with the government denying this, she's denying my constituent the justice that she deserves. Does she not agree with me that that's utterly shameful?
Utterly shameful doesn't even begin to describe it. Right up until quite recently, the government had said that they would include Scotland in this bill. They've decided not to do that for spurious reasons. Today, I have been talking to sub-postmasters, and I invited Scottish MPs to come and speak. And the main point that Scottish MPs, whether they are Liberal Democrats or Conservative ministers, that they wouldn't include Scotland was one, because the First Minister said that he didn't want to see criminals getting away, getting exonerated when they were guilty. No one wants that. I've heard the Minister himself say that previously in this House.
You did say it.
I thank the Honourable Lady for giving way, and I admire the passion with which she is speaking on behalf of sub-postmasters. Would she agree with me that part of the sense of insult upon injury here is that there's no proper explanation being given as to why Scotland can't be included, and it looks like petty partisanship, which I have to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, is borne out by the chuntering and sniggering and laughter going on behind me as my honourable friend speaks.
I thank my honourable friend for giving way. She is right. I am passionate about this. As chair of the all-party parliamentary group on post offices, I have deliberately worked cross-party for years on this very issue. I have worked with everyone, and indeed when I wrote to the Prime Minister at one point, I had signatures from every party in this House and from a party which does not attend this House. Sinn Féin themselves, a member from Sinn Féin, signed my letter. I've also heard it said today that the Lord Advocate in Scotland doesn't want this. Well, at no point has the Lord Advocate made a view on proposed legislation in either Westminster or Holyrood. And the Lord Advocate is not responsible for bringing cases of miscarriages of justice before the Court of Appeal in Scotland. That's the Scottish... Yes, of course I allow.
I'm grateful to the Honourable Lady for giving way, because I have worked with her as chair of the APPG, and I commend her for the work that she's done over many, many years. The point surely is this about the Lord Advocate, that the route to justice has to go through the Scottish Parliament because it was the route to prosecution that went through the Scottish Parliament. That is where the route of accountability lies. And can I refer? There was some talk about chuntering. It seems to go in more than one way, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I refer the honourable lady to the comments of the Lord Advocate in the Scottish Parliament on the 16th of January? If the Scottish Parliament, if the Lord Advocate really wants this bill to proceed, then she could say so in terms herself. Chunter on, boys.
I don't think that was an edifying intervention.
Take an edifying intervention.
Yes.
My honourable friend take an edifying intervention. Is my honourable friend as surprised as me that the right honourable gentleman who's just spoken doesn't understand, as a former prosecutor, that prosecutions don't go through Parliament? The prosecution service is completely independent. The prosecution service in Scotland is completely independent of the Parliament. It's a fundamental aspect of our constitution. Is she as shocked as me by the fact that the right honourable gentleman doesn't understand that? And does she agree with me that it rather undermines the force of the points he's making that he's missed such a fundamental point?
I would like to thank my learned and honourable friend for bringing that point forward. The body responsible for bringing miscarriages of justice before the Court of Appeal in Scotland is the Scottish Criminal Case Review Commission, not under the spell of the Lord Advocate. This argument is spurious, to say the least. I certainly will.
My honourable friend who's making an excellent speech. Is she aware of the evidence given by Professor James Chalmers of Glasgow University to the Justice Committee a couple of weeks ago, who was asked this very question, who said that in his view it was better that the legislation goes through this place with legislative consent motions in Scottish Parliament because it's tied directly to the UK compensation scheme in this area?
Thank you. I thank my honourable friend for that intervention. Yes, I am very aware of that. The Regius Professor of Law at the University of Glasgow made that very point to the Justice Committee. There has been widespread disquiet, and I think the honourable member who is the chair of the Select Committee on Justice would agree with me. No one in the legal profession really wants this bill. It's breaking all precedent, but for a really, really, really good reason. Postmasters have suffered. For Robert Thompson, the postmaster who was going to be sitting up there, was convicted in 2006 while his mother was still alive. He's the man who had to talk to his sons and tell him, I might not be here tomorrow. He didn't go to prison, but he couldn't get a job that actually compared to gave him the income that he had when he was a postmaster. He has been in penury, his life has been turned upside down, his children have suffered enormously. And this is the case for so many sub-postmasters across the United Kingdom. They did nothing wrong, yet people were pointing at them in the street, whispering, saying to another sub-postmaster who was going to be up there watching us all today, he had to move away and moved back to his hometown because 5 years later he heard people in the supermarket saying, there's the guy that stole from the post office. This kind of thing never leaves these victims. These victims will carry this to their dying day. That man's mother died before her son spent 2 years going through the Scottish courts to be exonerated. This place keeps, to every time I've been here and anything legal comes up, I am told by this place that this Parliament is sovereign. Well, prove it. Put this bill into Scotland-wide use as well. You can stand at the back and smile and snigger. I mean this. This is absolutely disgraceful that you are saying to Scottish sub-postmasters who were convicted that they can't get justice at the same time as their English, Welsh and Northern Irish counterparts. This is a Westminster problem. Westminster must and should sort it out, and it's easily done. Ask for a legislative consent motion, you'll get it. The Scottish Parliament will put a bill through to exonerate these chaps, but they cannot, these postmasters, they cannot do it. They cannot mirror exactly what is done in this place until this bill goes through all of its stages.
On that point, will she give way?
Yes.
Again? Yeah. I'm grateful to her for giving way again. Having regard to the evidence of Professor Chalmers, who of course is the Regius Professor of Criminal Law at Glasgow University, doesn't she agree that it would be best done in this place? Doesn't she agree with me that we often hear sanctimonious lectures from the UK government about how Scotland's two governments should work together to benefit Scotland? Isn't this legislation dealing with a problem made on the UK government's watch the perfect example of something where somewhere where Scotland's two governments should act together, with this government taking the lead in the same way as they've done for Northern Ireland, and the Scottish Government consenting, so that we can get this justice done swiftly for Scottish postmasters and mistresses in the same way as it's been done for other people in this such glorious union that the Tory bench should always tell us about.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Yes, and I was appalled and upset and disturbed by the fact that the Scottish Government had been trying to contact Westminster ministers to get this bill through, covering Scotland as well. And there was no comeback, there was no correspondence, nobody bothered. And one afternoon, within 2 hours, the Right Honourable Member for Thirsk and Malton, who I greatly admire, and he knows that, I have a very good working relationship with him, was able to phone the Northern Irish First Minister, Deputy First Minister and Justice Secretary within a 2-hour period.
Has the Honourable Lady... Yes. Sorry, the Honourable Lady just sat down. I think the Minister was trying to intervene. I wasn't clear whether she'd finished. Minister Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you for giving way. I've met the Scottish Justice Minister twice online. The reason I met the Northern Ireland ministers physically, they came here to Parliament to meet us. Can I just push back on something she said a few moments ago? She said this Parliament is sovereign, absolutely sovereign. But on these matters, her Parliament is also sovereign. And clearly, as she said earlier in her remarks, there is legal controversy. And these matters, there is legal controversy in these, as she admitted herself. And we are taking, this Parliament, the legal risk around that. But is she aware of her Lord Advocate's position on this particular matter? When it was said, it is important, these are actual words, it is important to recognise that in Scotland there is an established route of appeal in circumstances such as this, and due process must be followed. Does she not believe in that situation her Parliament should act in terms of overturning these convictions?
Marion Fellows, I'm quite anxious that we don't have too many long interventions, so if honourable members want to catch my eye, there is plenty of time for debate, if that's what they would like to do. Marion Fellows.
Mr. Speaker, I hate to disagree with you because, as you know, I don't do that. But there will be no more time for other people to speak on this bill if it doesn't include Scotland in it. However, as the Minister intervened on me and said that the Scottish Parliament is sovereign, well, there's a surprise, because we're all wanting the Scottish Parliament on these benches to be sovereign. No, they are not. In Scotland, the people have sovereignty in Scotland, not the Parliament. Madam Deputy Speaker, we're dancing on the heads of pins. This is not my intention. This is very clear. This is actually so clear it's transparent. There's party politics involved in all of this. And actually, until 2 weeks, 6 days ago, the Secretary of State for Business, Industry and Trade actually described the Scottish Parliament as lazy. That she said that why didn't the Scottish Parliament put through its own legislation? Believe me, it can and it will if it has to. But why should Scottish postmasters wait longer for justice? At second reading in this place, I said there was likely to be toing and froing, and that it would be July probably before this bill is passed.
Would the honourable lady give way?
Yes, okay.
Honourable friend for giving way, and can I, on behalf of my constituents who have been affected by this scandal, thank her for the astonishing amount of work that she's done in this. Is it not the case that while it would certainly create issues for the legal officers in Scotland, if Scotland was included in this bill at Westminster, it would create exactly the same issues for them if it was included in a bill through the Scottish Parliament? The concern for legal officers on both sides of the border is that they don't like it when parliamentarians overturn the decisions of the courts. This has to be done this time because some of the postmasters will not live to see the compensation if we don't go on with it soon.
My honourable friend for that intervention, and I heard the Minister chuntering from a sedentary position that, Scottish ministers should take responsibility for this. Yes, they will. But they didn't cause the need for this bill. This is a Westminster issue and should be sorted out here. Madam Deputy Speaker, I am incensed at this, and people may have realised this. This is not fake anger. This is a real issue for those men who came down here today. They were just representative of the 100 postmasters and mistresses in Scotland, and we haven't even started to talk about the effect on their families and those who have died. 2 years it took Robert Thompson to go through court, in which time his mother died. The same story is right across all the postmasters who have lost families, postmasters who have committed suicide. This has to be sorted, and I go back to my original point. Scottish postmasters will be behind the curve when it comes to applying for the due compensation they are entitled to if they are not exonerated at the same time as the rest of the postmasters in the UK. This is a piece of nonsense. Get it done for Scotland. You did it for Northern Ireland. Get it done for Scotland.
The question is that an instruction to the committee, that it be an instruction to the committee on the bill that it have leave to make provision relating to Scotland. Minister Kevin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Could I thank her for her remarks and her engagement? It's always been a pleasure to work with her, both within the Chamber and in other areas. Yes, we work cross-party. We've been very keen to do that all the way through on these matters. That doesn't mean, of course, we always agree. I was very grateful to have the opportunity to meet with her earlier and the Scottish postmasters that she refers to. I'm sorry they've not been able to attend this debate, but at that point I was able to explain to those postmasters why the government opposes this motion. As our position remains unchanged, this bill should not be amended to include Scotland. Okay, have to give way.
I just want to ask him, what did the Scottish postmasters say to you about the...
The Honourable Lady says that she mustn't refer directly like that, through the chair.
Did the Scottish sub-postmasters say to you, the Minister this afternoon? Were they pleased? Were they happy? Did they feel that they were getting justice through this action?
Well, I listened to them very carefully, and of course they would prefer us to legislate in the way she describes. And I set out very clearly very clear the reasons why we wouldn't, and I think they heard the concerns that we raised in terms of how we think this should proceed, and that Scotland has a historically separate legal jurisdiction, and the Lord Advocate and Crown Office and Procurator Fiscal Service have a unique role in respect to prosecutions in Scotland. We feel it is more appropriate for the Scottish Government to bring forward proposals to address prosecutions on this matter in Scotland, and for those to be scrutinised by the Scottish Parliament. The First Minister, I'll just make a little progress if I can. The First Minister has made public comments previously in which he has suggested that the UK's government approach to the criteria in our legislation was too broad in the convictions it would quash. He said, he's reported to say on the 27th of March, as reported in the National, he wants to make sure that people who have genuinely committed a crime do not then have access to compensation. We have been clear from the start there's a real risk of that happening with our approach. I'm happy to give way.
Forgive me, I wonder if he has taken the time to read the evidence that was taken at the Justice Committee, where Professor Chalmers said the purpose of the bill is to make sure convictions can be quashed so that innocent people can be compensated. The scandal originated with a faulty computer system and dubious investigatory procedures within a UK-wide institution. The scheme for compensation is to be UK-wide, so the paving legislation should be UK-wide too. That is the opinion of the Regis Professor of Criminal Law at the University of Glasgow. Has he given that any thought, and can he tell me why it's wrong?
Well, thank you for your point. I heard a point she raised earlier. It is very clear that all it is required for someone to access the compensation is an overturning of a conviction, and that can be done by the means as chosen by the Scottish Parliament or the means as been chosen by the UK Parliament. And then it will be identical access to the compensation schemes. It makes no difference by whatever mechanism those convictions are overturned. Can I just make a bit more progress if I can? As I said earlier, the Lord Advocate said very clearly it's important to recognise that in Scotland there is an established route of appeal in circumstances such as this, and due process must be followed. They are, of course, entitled to that view. These are difficult political choices which we have taken in defining the cohort criteria, and it is right that responsible ministers remain accountable for those decisions. The buck stops here. It must also stop with the Scottish Government. I'm happy to give way.
I'm confused at the inconsistency here, so perhaps the Minister could help us. It is putting through a criminal justice bill at the moment, which impacts on Scotland, which has required the Scottish Parliament to pass legislative consent for that bill. So if it's good enough for the criminal justice bill going through this place, why is it not good enough for this bill going through this place?
Well, as I said earlier, they have the responsibility and they have the means to be able to perform this legislation. We think it's important that Scottish ministers take responsibility for their decisions in this area, given the nature of these issues. If I make progress, if I can, Madam Speaker. I know that the First Minister stated on the Thursday, the 18th of April, that the Scottish Government is prepared to introduce legislation to overturn convictions to the Scottish Parliament. I understand by the Honourable Lady, the Member for Motherwell Wishaw, that legislation has actually been drafted. I believe it is possible and necessary for the Scottish Government to do so swiftly. Our position on Scotland's inclusion in the bill is very clear. The Government made a statement on the 22nd of February to this effect, and I have written to the Scottish Government on this point too. Indeed, the First Minister's comments, together with the proposed draft amendments to the UK bill that the Scottish Government have published, suggest that they should be in a position to do so. The UK Government remains committed to supporting the Scottish Government to progress their own approach to their legislation. I have met with Scottish Government ministers multiple times since this bill was introduced, and officials at the Department for Business and Trade and the Ministry of Justice hold weekly meetings with officials in the Scottish Government to discuss these issues. In conclusion, I remain of the view that the Scottish Government should introduce their own legislation to quash convictions in their jurisdiction, and as such, the Government opposes this motion.
Shadow Minister Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. The Horizon scandal is one of the most egregious miscarriages of justice in British history and has robbed sub-postmasters of their lives, their liberty and their livelihoods. We welcome the Government's inclusion of Northern Ireland into the territorial scope of this bill, following our representations including at second reading. We agree that sub-postmasters in Scotland who have been victims of this devastating scandal also need urgent exoneration and compensation, as much as cases in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. And I want to commend the Honourable Lady for her work in tirelessly campaigning for victims across the United Kingdom and especially in Scotland, and her work in the APPG. However, the case of Scotland's inclusion provides a unique set of issues. Unlike Northern Ireland, there has not been united support for Scotland's inclusion in the bill. If I can make a bit of progress, both the Scottish judiciary and a number of MSPs have publicly opposed this course of action. I give way to the Honourable Lady.
Will the Honourable Lady agree with me that many people in England, Wales and Northern Ireland have vociferously opposed the bill, but actually understand, as they do in Scotland, that it's necessary, it's a pragmatic solution to a situation that has been going on far too long?
Honourable Lady for her intervention, but the reality is this is a very, very unusual bill, and there are serious issues, which we will go on to debate, about the issues to do with the powers, the separation of powers in the legislature and judiciary. And in a context where, as I've said, there is disagreement between the judiciary and the legislature in Scotland, we believe it is not appropriate for the United Kingdom Parliament to overrule the Scottish judiciary. It should be for, Madam Deputy Speaker, it should be for Holyrood to make that call and pass a mirror bill. Therefore, we intend to abstain on this motion to include Scotland.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. Can I thank the Honourable Lady for Motherwell and Wishaw for her efforts in organising the briefing for us today. I did attend the briefing. I think there was only one sub-postmaster and one solicitor present at the time, but it was a useful exercise to hear from them. I also pay tribute, as I have done before, to the work that she has done. I fear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that I suppose it's a consequence of the motion before the House that we are being perhaps more heavily emphasising here the procedural aspects rather than the outcomes. And I think the House today needs to focus on the best possible outcomes for the sub-postmasters. Now, in relation to Northern Ireland, it was the case that to insist on the Northern Ireland Assembly putting through legislation would require a 12-week minimum statutory consultation period, and that would have produced a worse outcome for sub-postmasters in Northern Ireland. For that reason, I thought that the direction that the Minister moved was absolutely sensible. I'm afraid I don't take the same view in relation to the position in Scotland. I fear that, in fact, to include Scotland in the bill that is going through this House would leave unresolved issues, and for that reason it would leave Scottish postmasters in a poorer position than the ones in the rest of the country. If the Honourable Lady will just let me explain why I take that view, I will. The Lord Advocate on the 16th of January made the following observations, and I think she's quite right. She said the vast majority of cases that may be affected by the issue were cases in which the accused pled guilty to the offence. Often these pleas were tendered under legal representation. Although it's impossible to comment on every case, prosecutors do not mark cases to proceed in their absence of corroboration. They simply do not do that. Defence solicitors do not advise clients to plead guilty in the absence of corroboration. In cases that proceed to trial, the sheriffs do not convict in the absence of corroboration. As a result, it is reasonable to infer that in cases that resulted in a conviction, whether by guilty plea or conviction after trial, other evidence was available that was capable of supporting the finding of guilt. As I have explained, not every Horizon case will involve a miscarriage of justice. In some cases, there was sufficient evidence to support a criminal conviction. That is the views and the analysis of the Lord Advocate. And essentially what she is saying there, and I've always believed that this was actually right, because of the way the laws of evidence and procedure operate in Scotland, in particular the need for corroboration. You have qualitative safeguards available to people before the Scottish courts that bring better outcomes. The presence of corroboration is an important part of Scots law, and I think that the Lord Advocate is right to highlight that. And it's because she has raised these issues, I believe that it is better for this legislation to be done through the Scottish Parliament, where at this stage, the equivalent stage, the business would be held before committee. It wouldn't be done in a chamber in the way like this. Again, something that I think is better and preferable. I give way to the Honourable Member.
Does he not appreciate that the concerns that the Lord Advocate has expressed are the sort of concerns that have been expressed across these islands by lawyers about this legislation? But ultimately, it is the decision of Parliament whether or not to exonerate. So, has he read the evidence given to the Justice Committee? And if he disagrees with Professor Chalmers, and I'll quote it again, the purpose of the bill is to make sure convictions can be quashed so that innocent people can be compensated quickly. The scandal originated with a faulty computer system and dubious investigatory procedures within a UK-wide institution. The scheme for compensation is UK-wide, so the paving legislation should be UK-wide. That's not my opinion. It's the opinion of one of Scotland's most pre-eminent criminal lawyers, the Regis Professor at Glasgow. Can the honourable gentleman tell me why he's wrong?
The Honourable Learned Lady has said herself, it's a matter of opinion. Now, I put great confidence in his opinion, but I come to a different conclusion. And it is because I come to the different conclusion that I feel that given that the route to the conviction lay through civil servants employed by the Scottish Government, and as the Honourable Lady reminds us, I was almost 3 decades ago one of them, so I understand perfectly how the system works, and I also understand that if I ever got it wrong, incredible though that may seem, but if I ever got it wrong, then the accountability for my mistake would be through the Lord Advocate. Yes, of course, I'll give it.
I'm grateful to him for giving me, given his experience of the system, and I know that nobody has challenged my honourable friend's very important point, that because the Scottish legislation has got to mirror the UK legislation, it can't be passed until this bill has had its royal consent. In his experience, once the Scottish Parliament is able to start considering that legislation, what is the minimum length of time, the minimum length of delay that it would take before Scotland caught up? And secondly, would you agree it would be outrageous in the meantime for anyone to try to shut down the Scottish Parliament to build in an even further unnecessary delay?
Well, I'm intrigued to know what that final question about shutting down the Scottish Parliament might be. But yes, it is open to the Scottish Parliament to deal with matters like this in an emergency procedure, which it would be quite, I think, sensible for them to do, and it would bring sub-postmasters across the whole of the United Kingdom to exactly the same place at the end of the day. It can be done, as the honourable gentleman, I'm sure, is aware, in a matter of days. But we have heard already from others, just a second, we have heard already from others that the legislation is drafted and ready to go. So, as a matter of politics, what is it that the Scottish National Party do not want to admit? And the truth of the matter is that they have... Just 2 seconds. Oh, okay.
Madam Deputy Speaker, Politics, as far as I am concerned, and as far as the SNP is concerned, doesn't actually come into this. It's about getting justice at the same time for Scottish sub-postmasters as for postmasters across the rest of the United Kingdom.
I just want to be clear that interventions do need to be questions to the person who is making the speech. That's it. The Honourable Lady's got it. He's got it. Alistair Carmichael.
Well, Lady knows that I agree with her a lot more than either of us would ever admit. But in relation to this matter, it clearly is a difference of opinion. It is a political choice as to whether or not the route to exoneration lies through the Scottish Parliament or through this place. In the circumstances that I have outlined, the questions that would be left unresolved if this motion of a...
I sense that he's reaching his peroration, and because we're both Scots lawyers, I wonder if he would take the opportunity to join in me in correcting the Labour Party spokesperson, because she said repeatedly that the Scottish judiciary didn't want this legislation. Now, he will know, like me, that the Scottish judiciary would never comment like the English judiciary on the desirability of legislation. Does he, like me, think she was getting mixed up with the Lord Advocate? And then maybe she would have the chance to correct the record later, because it's very important that the impression not be given by this House that the Scottish judiciary have been criticising Parliament when they have not.
I think what I would say gently to the Honourable and Learned Lady is that the Scottish judiciary would never comment publicly. Because, in my experience, they have ways of making their views known. But actually, the Honourable and Learned Lady, is right in pointing out that on this occasion the opposition spokesperson did, to my mind, confuse the office of the Lord Advocate and the judiciary incorrectly. I would say to her that actually that in itself demonstrates to me the need for this to be dealt with in the place where the expertise lies, and that is the Scottish Parliament.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Deputy Speaker. I find myself in the unusual position today where I am supporting an SNP motion. I think it's probably the first time. I suspect it will be the last time as well. But nevertheless, I believe that the Honourable Lady for Motherwell and Wishaw has shown, first of all, her dedication to the people who she represents. I've sat in the committee with her. I have listened to her in debates. I know the passion she feels about this. And it is not, in my view, just about making a political point. It's because she honestly believes that postmasters and postmistresses in Scotland who have been wronged by the Post Office, who carelessly dealt with their cases, deserve the same justice as ones in Northern Ireland and England and Wales. And I appreciate the fact that the Minister listened to voices from Northern Ireland. And I have found that since he came into this position, where this had gone for a long time, he has been dedicated, and I give him praise for that. He has been dedicated to resolving this issue. But here is one last part of the jigsaw that needs to be dealt with, and I believe could be dealt with through including Scotland, as Northern Ireland has been included in this.
But the Honourable Gentleman...
Well, yes.
Thank you very much. I thank the Honourable Gentleman for giving way, and like others who have spoken, I would like to pay tribute to the Honourable Lady for the work she has done. We all feel for the postmasters throughout Scotland. But would the Honourable Gentleman agree with me or accept my point that a lot of people in Scotland at the moment are watching this and wondering, why is the SNP's argument not with the Lord Advocate, who is the person responsible for this delay? Why are they bringing it here? Why is their government not taking it up?
Absolutely. I don't know. Unbelievable. Sometimes I don't know about the relationships between the Lord Advocate and the Scottish National Party, but the one thing I do know is that we have a remedy going through this House today that could deal with that, and it can dispense with whatever differences there might be in Scotland, and it can deal with an issue which we have all agreed in this House is something that needs to be dealt with and needs to be dealt with quickly. Now, I've listened to the arguments that have been made by the Minister and by others, that there is due process to be gone through. And indeed, I've listened to the member from the Liberal Dems who said, and you've got to remember that the Scottish system is different. The level of proof in Scotland is different. There was greater information available. Now, the implication, I've got to say, of that comment is that maybe when the Scottish Parliament would consider this in the Scottish context, they would come to the conclusion, oh, but some of these convictions were safe. And so some postmasters and postmistresses would not be exonerated at all. We have not taken that view for the whole of the United Kingdom. There may well be, and indeed some judges have argued, that not all the convictions were unsafe anyway. But we have decided that it is fair, and given the way in which this whole Horizon situation has been dealt with, it is fair that we take the chance that there may be some people who were rightly convicted, but we don't start going through it case by case, because that was one of the arguments that was made, and I can remember it being made by a number of members here. Why don't we do this? Why don't we do this on a case by case basis? Yeah.
I'm grateful to the honourable gentleman for giving way. The situation is very different in Scotland, where the Lord Advocate's position is exactly that. She doesn't want to risk one person who may have been rightly convicted. Therefore, it is actually impossible for Scotland to follow the same route of this at the moment, while the Lord Advocate's position, as detailed in the Scottish Parliament earlier this year, is against mass exoneration. Until she changes her position and the advice she gives to the Scottish Government, it would be impossible to follow the bill that is being construed here in the House of Commons.
I don't know if the member was not listening to me. Because I have made the point that the same situation may exist in some cases in other parts of the United Kingdom, but we have been prepared because of the exceptional circumstances. And it really, I've got to say, if that's the Lord Advocate's position, that's fair enough. But we as a Parliament are making a decision for other people in England, Scotland and Wales, and therefore if this bill is available to us, we should be applying it to people in Scotland as well. I'll give way, yes.
I'm very grateful for giving the chance for possibly the only supportive intervention I'll ever make on the honourable gentleman. Does he not agree with me that if it was really such a barrier that we can't have the possibility of a single guilty person walking free, we would never have the requirement for guilt to be proven beyond reasonable doubt, not only in Scotland but in England, Wales and Northern Ireland. We accept through our judicial system that it's better for a guilty person to go free than for an innocent person to go to jail.
I want to move on because, Madam Deputy Speaker, you're catching my eye. No, I won't, because I just want to make two more points. The second one is this: the Minister has said, well, it can be done quickly through the Parliament in Scotland. Though it's already been pointed out that the Scottish Parliament cannot start the process until the law has gone through here. And then there will be a process. And I think I can say this, Madam Deputy Speaker, though some of the Scottish Nationalist members might not be able to say this. The situation in Scotland doesn't look very good at the moment for getting legislation through quickly for any reason, because of the uncertainty that there is around leadership, around what's going to happen, what support there's going to be. And there's I'll give way to the Minister in a minute. And there's a parallel here between the situation that we had in Northern Ireland. One of the arguments we made was the special circumstances with the Assembly just being set up again and the delay that that might cause. And that would mean that we could find further delay in getting justice for postmasters and postmisters in Scotland. I'll give way to the Minister.
I'm grateful to give me way. Can I just point out, the legislation apparently has already been drafted for Scotland. There is no requirement for their legislation to mirror our legislation. That will be up to the Scottish Parliament. It's very clear that's the case. We can also just accept it's not just the Lord Advocate that is against what we are doing here. The First Minister himself said, as I said earlier, that people who have safe convictions should not have access to the compensation. We are very clear that the route we are taking does raise that likelihood. So, therefore, I think it is only right that the Scottish Parliament takes this decision.
I know, and that's been the Minister's position throughout the discussions that we had earlier on, etc. I'm still arguing that on the basis of consistency, on the basis of fairness, on the basis of speed, and on the basis of what I believe is a political signal that we ought to be sending out to people in Scotland. And again, no Scottish National member is going to make this point, but I'm going to make this point, that we've already heard in this debate today that this decision is more a political decision. Now, I know the Scottish National Party always feel that they're being got at, and sometimes they deserve to be got at. But
just like your good self.
But the point I want to make is this: why do we create, when there's a mechanism to avoid it, a sense of victimhood? That people feel they're being got at. We're being treated differently. We could have been treated in the same way as the rest of the United Kingdom. I don't think that there's any political merit in excluding Scotland from this legislation. So for the people who have been wronged in the Horizon scandal, for the people who have had their reputations damaged, and I believe for the picture of this Parliament as being a fair Parliament, dealing with people right across the United Kingdom who have been affected by a United Kingdom problem, I believe that this motion should be passed today, and Scotland should be included along with Northern Ireland.
Michael Shanks.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And I do want to start by paying tribute to a number of people across this House who, when I arrived here last year, I could tell have already been working hard on this issue from a number of different parties, including my honourable friend, the member for Durham North, and my near neighbour, the member for Motherwell and Wishaw. And I think there is consensus across this House that there has been a huge injustice and that injustice has to be righted. The question, as we've heard from a number of people, is how that's done in Scotland. And it's those amendments that I want to speak briefly to. And there's 2 points I want to make. Firstly, this question of speed, which we've heard from a number of times. But more importantly, I think this question of accountability. And I think accountability is important. The Scottish Parliament has responsibility for justice in Scotland. Scotland has always had a separate legal system since long before the Scottish Parliament was re-established. And as we've heard, the questions of the Lord Advocate's position on this, the question of how the convictions were taken forward, not by the Post Office but by the Crown, the basis of evidence that was used in those... Can I just make a bit of progress, and I will give way? The evidence that was used around corroboration, there are differences in these convictions. But more importantly, the member for Motherwell and Wishaw earlier spoke about one of the organisations involved in this, the Scottish Criminal Cases Review Commission, which she rightly said was the body that brought cases for review in Scotland. But what she didn't mention was the accountability aspect of that, which is it was created by an act of the Scottish Parliament, it's responsible to the Scottish Parliament, it gets its budget from the Scottish Government. There's a very clear line of accountability between the Scottish Justice Secretary, the Scottish Government, and the bodies that are responsible for reviewing these convictions. So the accountability is very clearly with the Scottish Parliament. The second point... I'll give it.
Can I just put it to the honourable gentleman that he's completely misunderstanding what we're dealing with here. We are dealing with absolutely extraordinary legislation that is quashing convictions as a gateway to compensation. giving us a lecture of dubious accuracy on the lines of accountability of the Crown Office in Scotland doesn't address what we're about here. This is going over the head of the CPS in England, just as it would go over the head of the Crown Office in Scotland. Why can't he appreciate that point? Is it because he's playing politics with this issue, like his front bench?
I think the suggestion of dubious lectures coming from that party is slightly misguided. But I accept the point that I accept the point that this goes above normal legal precedent, but it also speaks to why there is no reason the Scottish Parliament can't invoke the emergency bill procedures that it has done in the past, recognising this is an extraordinary situation. Use the procedures that the Scottish Parliament has. I'll give way.
Giving way. But the Honourable Lady clearly doesn't understand how prosecutions are done in the UK. Sorry, in England. Well, in England, well, not in England, you didn't, because in England, the prosecutions, in England, the prosecutions and the posters were taken by the prosecution. They never went through the CPS. The difference being in Scotland, they did actually go through the Crown Office and the advocacy, and that's the difference. So to say that they're equivalent in terms of people reviewing those cases before they went to court, where decisions taken, is not similar.
Yes, I think that's absolutely right. And the key point here is, I don't think anyone is suggesting, there is no question that the Post Office must be held to account for the institutional levels of cover-up. And can I just make the point, and I will give way. There's no question that the Post Office must be held to account for that institutional cover-up, and that is the responsibility of this place in the inquiry to look into it. But the convictions were taken forward, the prosecutions were taken forward by the Crown Office, which is responsible to the Scottish Parliament. And that is the point I'm making about accountability. And I'll give way to the Honourable Lady.
Would the Honourable Gentleman agree with me that the people accountable for all of this is Post Office Limited, which is wholly owned? The single shareholder is the UK government. And the UK government took their eye off the ball, didn't follow through, and have taken years to admit that there was a problem in the first place. And if it's the UK government that caused this, they should fix it.
I'm very happy to agree with the Honourable Lady about the responsibility of Post Office Limited. And I just said that a few moments ago. But the prosecutions, based on that Post Office evidence, were taken forward by the Crown Office. And there's responsibility to go around here. I'll just answer the Honourable Lady's point, if that's okay. There's responsibility to go around here. The evidence absolutely came from a flawed system, and Post Office Limited must be held to account. That doesn't deal with the issue about the prosecutions in Scotland being taken forward, not just on the evidence from Horizon, but of course with corroboration from other sources of evidence as well.
For giving way. We've heard in this chamber today, I wondered if he shares my distaste at some of the things that have been said in the chamber today, that in Scotland we can't bring this forward in this Parliament today. Because in Scotland, some of the postmasters might indeed be guilty of theft, and we have to tread carefully. A bar that has not been placed on postmasters elsewhere in the UK.
I would share that distaste, but of course those comments were reflecting what the Lord Advocate said, and I've got letters from the Lord Advocate here that repeat that point a number of times. The Lord Advocate, of course, sits around the Cabinet table with, I think, at the moment, the current First Minister, Hamza Yousaf, but I'll need to check. So the second point, no, I've taken quite a lot of interventions. I'm going to make a bit of progress. The second point I wanted to make was this question of timing, because I don't accept this argument the SNP have made at all, that the timing is an issue here. The Minister, on a number of occasions, I've heard make the point that the compensation regime will be available to people who have been exonerated by whatever means that is, the moment they've been exonerated. So there's no question about that. And this question about the Scottish Parliament being able to rush through this legislation, it doesn't have the same processes as the Northern Ireland Assembly. It doesn't have to go through a lengthy consultation process. They could introduce a bill tomorrow and have it passed before a single one of the confidence votes is voted on Thursday. Indeed, in 2020, the Scottish Parliament passed an emergency bill on COVID regulations in just 2 days, a considerably more difficult piece of legislation, stretching to 138 pages. The idea that this bill is somehow more complicated than that is ridiculous. There's no reason why the Scottish Parliament cannot take responsibility and introduce this bill now. And indeed, if there was a question about not being able to finalise the bill until the UK bill had passed its processes, they could take it all the way to the final amendment stage and amend it as necessary. But actually the Minister again has said that the bill doesn't have to directly mirror the UK legislation for people to still have access to the same compensation, which is what the Honourable Member and I both want to see. So, if the SNP is unwilling to act in the Scottish Parliament to introduce it, my colleague Michael Mara, MSP, has already drafted a private member's bill. He'll introduce that bill this week. If they are unable to act on this, there will be no more dithering, there will be no more delays. If the SNP isn't going to act, then Labour will. And for that reason, I won't be supporting the SNP amendments today.
Marion Fellows.
Order. At no time has the Scottish Justice Secretary or the Scottish Parliament said they will not pass legislation.
I gather if the Honourable Lady would like to resume her seat. The Honourable Gentleman has finished his speech. Yeah. If the Honourable Lady would like to make a few comments, she doesn't need to do it through a point of order. Marion Fellows.
I have here today the Justice Secretary in Scotland's remarks on this. We remain crystal clear that the best way to achieve parity for the sub-postmasters across the UK who were convicted on the basis of tainted evidence from the Post Office Horizon system is for the UK Government's bill to be extended to Scotland, as it has been for Northern Ireland, just as we have been clear that if this isn't the case, we will bring forward a Scottish bill that mirrors the UK bill as quickly as possible.
The question is that it be an instruction to the committee on the Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill that the committee have leave to make provision for it to extend to Scotland. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Contrary, no. No! Division, clear the lobby. The question is that it be an instruction to the Committee on the Post Office Horizon Systems Offences Bill that the committee have leave to make provision for it to extend to Scotland. As many as are of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. No. Tell us for the ayes, Peter Grant and Gavin Newlands. Tell us for the noes, Robert Largan and Aaron Bell. Order. Order.
The ayes to the right, 42. The noes to the left, 265.
No.
Could we have a bit? The ayes to the right, 42. The noes to the left, 265. So the noes have it, the noes have it. Unlock. Thank you. Order. Order.
Post Office Horizon System Offences Bill.
As the House has agreed to the motion for an instruction in the name of Secretary Kemi Badenoch, I confirm that Government Amendments 23, 24, 26 to 44 and 46 to 56, New Clause 1 and Government New Clauses 2 and 3 are now selected in addition to those already selected. I remind members that in committee, members should not address the Chair as Deputy Speaker. Please use our names when addressing the Chair. Madam Chair, Madam Chairman or Mr Chairman are also acceptable. We begin with Government Amendment 25 to Clause 1, with which it will be convenient to consider the other amendments, clauses and new clauses as listed on the selection paper. I call Minister Kevin Hollinrake to move Government Amendment 25.
Yeah. Well, thank you, Dame Rosie. It's a pleasure to serve with you in the chair. I beg to move the amendments en bloc in the name of the Secretary of State. Given the nature of this debate, in moving the government amendments, I'll also use my speech to discuss the other amendments which have been tabled ahead of committee today. Firstly, I'll address the government amendments in the name of the Secretary of State relating to Northern Ireland. I'm referring to amendments 23 to 24, 26 to 44 and 46 to 56, as well as new clauses 1, 2 and 3. I'm grateful to the House for agreeing to the Government's instruction motion to enable debate on these important amendments. The Government has listened carefully to representations across the House regarding extension of the bill to Northern Ireland. The Government recognises the unique challenges faced by the Northern Ireland Executive in bringing forward legislation to quash convictions to a similar time frame as the rest of the UK. Happy, of course, to give way.
I just want to put on record during this committee stage our sincere appreciation and personal appreciation to the Minister for the way in which he's engaged with us, the pragmatic way in which he's approached these issues and the can-do attitude that he has extended to Northern Ireland. We've met on a number of occasions. I know he's been thoroughly received the thorough representations of the Right Honourable Member for East Antrim and colleagues right across this House, not least executive ministers in Northern Ireland. We are indebted to him. We recognise that this is a huge step forward for those sub-postmasters in Northern Ireland who felt that there wouldn't be light at the end of the tunnel. He has extended that very purposefully for all of those affected in Northern Ireland, and we thank him for it.
Minister.
Well, I'm very grateful for his kind words. It's a pleasure to work with him and his colleagues from the Northern Ireland, and we were always sympathetic to his arguments and delighted to be able to move forward as we have today. Very happy to give way.
The member for East Belfast. I think it would be fair to say on behalf of 23 postmasters and postmistresses in Northern Ireland, today, a week ago or a month ago, they had little hope. Today they have hope, and that's due down to the Minister's endeavours on behalf of them, his pushing this and government obviously accepting as well. So on behalf of those 23, we would like to say a big thank you to the Minister and to government for putting it forward. Thank you.
Well, I'm very grateful. He's right to address the point about postmasters themselves, the 23 he references, because that's why we are here, and that's why we're keen to act in this way. And we recognise the fact there were specific circumstances in Northern Ireland that would have delayed the exoneration and compensation to those individuals, and that's why we're acting as we are today. It's always a pleasure to work with him, as I have done on many different issues over the years. Particular issues include the Executive's recent restoration and additional public consultation requirements, which the House debated at second reading of the bill. In deciding to take this step, the Government recognised the extent of cross-community support for the extension of the bill to Northern Ireland. For these reasons, we've decided to put forward Government amendments which would extend the scope of the bill to Northern Ireland. I'm very grateful to have cross-party support from honourable members representing Northern Ireland constituencies in co-signing Government amendments, specifically the honourable members for Belfast East, East Antrim, East Londonderry, Strangford, North Antrim, North Down, South Antrim, Upper Bann, Belfast South. These amendments, which have been drafted in consultation with the Northern Ireland Executive, empower the Northern Ireland Department of Justice to implement the legislation in the same way as the Secretary of State will in England and Wales. The amendments would modify the criteria for the convictions which are overturned to ensure that relevant convictions from Northern Ireland are captured within its scope. Specifically, they would add those secured by the Public Prosecution Service in Northern Ireland and refer to distinct Northern Ireland offences. Additionally, this group of amendments would ensure that relevant cautions will be deleted in Northern Ireland as they will be in England and Wales. These amendments have the same intent as Amendment New Clause 1 proposed by the Honourable Member for North Antrim, and I hope he will be happy to withdraw his amendment on that basis. I beg to move Government Amendments 23 to 24, 26 to 44 and 46 to 56 and New Clauses 2 and 3. Dame Rosie, moving on to Amendment 1 in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Birmingham Hodge Hill. I thank him for his continued engagement on this bill and wider horizon matters. While it is vital we stay true to our objective of bringing justice to wrongly convicted postmasters, it is also important to keep in mind the constitutionally sensitive nature of this bill. We should legislate in a way which respects the separation of powers and the independence of the judiciary. This amendment would widen the scope of the bill to include convictions that have been upheld by the Court of Appeal. It would automatically quash such convictions, thereby overriding decisions taken by the senior judiciary. These cases are excluded from the bill because the Government believes that it should tread very carefully where judges in the senior appellate courts have considered a case on its merits. We do not consider it is to be appropriate for Parliament to interfere with these decisions.
I'm grateful to the Minister for giving way on this point and indeed for the way that he is approaching it. He will have seen an excellent letter from the Chairman of the Justice Committee sent to him last week, in which the Chairman of the Justice Committee underlined that almost all of the witnesses before his committee agreed it was unfair for the bill to take a restrictive approach in the way the Minister has, while taking a rather expansive approach elsewhere. Now, I know the Minister has written back to the Chairman of the Justice Committee, but his letter didn't touch on this point, and I wonder if he'd take this opportunity just to wrap that up for us.
Well, can I thank him for his intervention and his work, and indeed my right friend that he refers to. We take these matters very seriously. The independence of the judiciary, where the appeal court has upheld the conviction and declared the conviction safe, we do think that is a material concern, and there will always be different opinions in these areas, but we think we are striking the right balance in terms of overturning convictions that we believe to be unsafe in the main, and ones that have been, as I say, been before a senior judge.
Would the Minister give way on that point?
Yes, Farry, please give way.
I'm very grateful to my honourable friend for giving way, and I too want to pay tribute to the extremely constructive way in which he's engaged with everybody on this. And my initial position was entirely supportive of the Government of this. But I must say the evidence given to the Justice Committee does cause me at least to think again. And it's for this reason that it is right, normally, to to be very, very wary indeed of trespassing upon decisions made by the courts. However, we have chosen to do that because it is thought desirable for the greater good in respect of the bulk of convictions. The point I think that needs to be emphasised is perhaps we have not appreciated that in the cases which were upheld, where convictions were upheld by the Court of Appeal, the Court of Appeal was applying a narrower test to the relevance of the horizon evidence. They were saying, in Hamilton and related cases, that the test was whether or not the horizon evidence was essential to the conviction. We do not apply that test as a matter of a policy decision now. That could have the bizarre situation where someone who went to the Court of Appeal or did not get to the Court of Appeal because the Criminal Cases Review Commission did not refer it to them, would have their conviction quashed. Somebody who the Commission thought did have an arguable case went to the Court of Appeal but was rejected on what is now a narrower test than Parliament is now creating, would not benefit from having their conviction quashed. That's the unfairness I think maybe we do need to think a little more about, and that I think is the thrust of what my right honourable gentleman is getting at.
Well, again, thank you for his intervention. There will, of course, always be different legal opinion on these matters, and I think as he expressed in his remarks, he's had two different opinions on this himself in terms of what we should do in this regard. Of course, and I know that's based upon further submissions of evidence he's received, but of course we consider these matters very carefully. My right honourable friend, the Justice Secretary, is here right now, listening to his comments, of course, will always continue to reflect on this legislation in terms of making sure we get in the right place. But I do understand the points he's raising.
It's a pure short point I want to make. There were certainly differences of opinions as to the appropriateness of the measure as a whole. Dr Quirk being in a minority, 3 taking a different view. But there wasn't a difference of opinion on the factual point that the test is different, that the test applied by the Court of Appeal in Hamilton is different from that which is in the statute. That was a matter of unanimity. That's what I wanted to say.
Yes, I do understand that and accept that point. I guess the point being still, though, the decision has to be taken whether to include these cases or not. And there's definitely a different legal opinion on that, because I've had different representations on that particular point made to me. We recognise that this approach may leave a small number of individuals concerned about the way forward for their cases. In cases where the Court of Appeal has upheld a conviction, the usual routes of appeal remain available to them. Those affected can apply to the Criminal Cases Review Commission, which can review their cases. Happy to give way, yeah.
Given way. I mean, he knows we've discussed this at length at the advisory board. Would he agree with me that, especially what's coming out of the inquiry the last few weeks, there is evidence there that may have a bearing on some of these cases, and that I accept why he doesn't want to include them in this bill, but something needs to be looked at in some of these cases to see whether there is grounds for appeal.
Minister?
Well, of course, and I'm listening intently to the evidence before the inquiry myself, and there's some shocking revelations, it's true to say, and I think it's quite clear, as he illustrated in his work with the advisory board, there was a maliciousness about some of this prosecution that is a great concern, as well as the flawed horizon system. So part of the reason we are legislating as we are reflects that particular position. But of course, we'll continue to look at the evidence that emerges.
Before we move on.
Yep. Okay.
I would be grateful if this is the approach that he is going to take. Could he just say to the House a little bit more then about how his department will support those individuals who do find themselves in this egregious position? As my right honourable friend said, I mean, there will be evidence that has now come to light, which was not available to the Court of Appeal, or indeed to those courts that may have refused leave to appeal. These individuals will be in a terrible state now. What can his department do, and on what timetable, to support them through the process that he is proposing they take?
Well, clearly, I think he makes the point himself. As more evidence emerges, it may be that the CCRC takes a different view of cases that are brought forward, and people who have presented their cases to the CCRC can revisit that an application to the Criminal Cases review commission and which then can make recommendations as it sees fit. Clearly, we are happy to provide any information that we possess, or indeed that the Post Office will do the same. And they say the inquiry revelations may bring up information that would help in some cases. The CCRC may refer cases to the Court of Appeal if they consider there is a real possibility that the conviction would not be upheld. With the constitutional sensitivities in mind, I hope the Right Honourable Member will agree to withdraw this amendment. I turn now to Amendments 3 and 6, again in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Birmingham Hodge Hill. These amendments would require the Secretary of State to include details of available financial redress in notifications to people who have had their convictions quashed or cautions deleted by this bill. These amendments come as part of a wider number of recommendations by the Business and Trade Committee, to which the Government has since provided its response. I can reassure the Right Honourable Gentleman and the whole Committee we will include information about redress in the notifications which we send to postmasters when their convictions are overturned. Our aim is that the redress process will follow seamlessly from the process of overturning convictions. There is no need to legislate for this. Those with cautions may have already sought financial redress via the Horizon Shortfall Scheme or the Group Litigation Order Scheme. We will provide them with the necessary guidance to identify the appropriate route to claim financial redress if they have not done so already. Sorry, yes, happy to give that.
Grateful for the Minister clarifying these points as we go along. So he will know that many sub-postmasters have not applied for the full extent of their potential claim because they're unsure about the case law involved. And I understand that there is some guidance that the Department is using in making judgments, for example, the Dyson judgment, which is not publicly available for perfectly good reasons. There is a bit of creativity going into how we solve this problem. The Post Office wrote to me last night to say, for example, that on the Horizon scheme, they are putting the heads of loss and the ranges or the averages of claim that are being agreed, and that could be one of the ways in which sub-postmasters are given a sense of what, if you like, is the tariff. Could he just say a little bit more about how we absolutely guarantee in that notification that we maximise the chance of sub-postmasters absolutely claiming the maximum possible amount that they should be entitled to?
We've tried to design the schemes in conjunction with the relevant legal firms who are advising most of the claimants in terms of claiming redress. So, and we'll continue to work with them as we do with the advisory board in different mechanisms we can use to make this process simpler and more transparent and easier to navigate. Clearly, all the circumstances, the individual circumstances, do differ from case to case, despite some of the similarities of those cases. So it's important we do. If people go down the full assessment route, all those different claims are assessed individually, which obviously takes time. But if there are mechanisms we can use that, for example, tariffs, as he describes it, to try and expedite the process, then we're very happy to look at various recommendations, and we'll continue to work with the advisory board on that basis. The Government will also provide more general guidance for the redress scheme in due course. I'd be more than happy to consider any recommendations he makes or the committee makes, and we don't believe at this point in time there's a need to legislate to do that, and I very much hope he'll feel able to withdraw his amendments. In terms of the amendments 4, 5, 7 and 8, also in his name, Dame Rosie, these are very worthy amendments, and I share the sentiment behind them. We all want postmasters to get redress as quickly as possible. The Right Honourable Gentleman's amendments are not, we believe, the right way to do that. The schemes are already being expedited based upon some of the learnings that we have and our experience of the last few weeks and months. In the Group Litigation Order Scheme run by the Department for Business and Trade, we have committed to making a first offer within 40 working days of receiving a full claim in 90% of cases. I'm delighted to tell this committee that we are now meeting that target. The figure has been slowly rising, and I hope it will continue to do so. There will always be some claims, of course, which raise novel or difficult issues, which will take longer than the 40 working days. We'll try to resolve them as quickly as possible. We are currently exploring what delivery targets would also be appropriate for the Horizon Compensation Redress Scheme. As previously announced to the House, this will be the scheme that delivers redress to those that have their convictions quashed by this bill, and the Government will update the House in due course as to relevant targets. In line with other Horizon redress schemes, our goal of prompt redress will be just the same. The Department's response is not usually the problem. As of the 26th of April, in the GLO scheme, we have just made 167 offers in response to 177 full claims received, so we have just 10 claims in hand. The issue generally is the rate at which claims are coming in. We received just 24 between the 1st and 26th of April. We don't blame the claimants' lawyers for that. These claims are complex and need to be prepared properly. However, we are working with claimant representatives to find ways of speeding up the process of claim preparation. The GLO scheme is piloting a fast-track approach under which the level of forensic accounting analysis required is substantially reduced. So far, the pilot looks to be working well. We will look to build on it in the coming weeks. We don't feel we're going to speed up redress by legislating. We need to deliver change at this sort of nitty-gritty level, and are determined to do that. And with that assurance, I hope the Right Honourable Member will also withdraw these amendments. Moving now to Government Amendments 25 and 45, the bill takes effect by quashing convictions upon royal assent. These amendments make clear that it will not affect any convictions secured after that date. This has always been the Government's intention. We table these amendments to put beyond doubt that the bill does not apply to any future convictions. We must keep in mind the constitutionally sensitive nature of the bill, and I hope that this amendment reassures the committee about the exceptional nature of this legislation and the careful balance we are seeking to achieve, and I beg to move these amendments. Dame Rosie, I now come to Amendment 71 in the name of my honourable and learned friend, the member for Bromley and Chislehurst. His amendment would introduce a sunset clause to the bill. We thank him for his amendment and for all the work he and the Justice Select Committee have done in considering this bill and the issues it raises. I'd like to reassure him that the Government shares his concern that this bill should not be seen as a precedent for Parliament's acting outside its usual constitutional role. However, this amendment is not necessary to achieve that aim. The key action of this bill to quash the convictions for relevant offences in scope takes place once and once only, when the bill comes into force on the day it is passed. An expiry date is therefore inherent in Clause 1 of the bill. In effect, it expires as soon as it comes into force. To put this beyond doubt, the Government has tabled Amendments 25 and 45, to which I referred earlier. These amendments make clear that it will not affect any convictions secured after royal assent. However, my right honourable and learned friends, Amendment 71 would also sunset the other parts of the bill. This includes those setting out the process for identifying quashed convictions, notifying individuals that their convictions have been quashed, and crucially amending criminal records. If this amendment were accepted, it would place a time limit on a postmaster's ability to come forward and identify their conviction as being in scope of the bill and have their records amended. We could then be in a situation where, say in 3 years' time, an individual had their conviction quashed as a matter of law but still has a criminal record. This would not give victims of this scandal the justice they deserve. We are clear, and there's agreement across the House, that this exceptional legislation does not set a precedent. Very happy to give way.
I'd like to thank him for giving way. I hoped he was going to talk to Amendment 70 as well. I'm just so pleased we are going through this today because it's so important, this legislation, for so many people. I've written to him about my constituents who came to see me about her husband. Her husband was a sub-postmaster. He had been written to by the post office who told him about his exceptional bookkeeping. He then discovered an unexplained loss in the amounts. He called the auditors came in, they locked him out of his business, they searched his home, they didn't find any evidence, but they took away his business, his home, his livelihood, his reputation. We've heard it so many times. The only difference, Dame Rosie, is that this happened in 1992 under the precursor system to Horizon. So a system that operated before. Amendment 70 mentioned the pathway system. My constituent was using something called capture. He fortunately did not have
the case was dropped before it got to criminal courts. But I just wonder, I know the Minister is looking at whether or not there are more of these capture cases. When it comes to the other place, could we make sure that the legislation, if needed, can also quash any criminal convictions due to capture or other precursor systems, as well as Horizon?
I'm grateful. Well, I will be speaking to Amendment 70, but obviously I wrote back to her on her particular case, and we are looking at this, and the Right Member for North Durham will have something to say, I'm sure, in his remarks about this particular issue. We have agreed to instigate an independent review of that particular software. There are some fundamental differences. For example, it's not networked, so therefore no remote access is possible. We know that's a major feature of the issues with Horizon, but I'm very happy to continue to engage with her on this particular issue, and I congratulate her on the way she's dealt with this on behalf of her constituents. My Right Honourable Learned Friends Amendment 71 would also sunset other parts of the bill. This would not give victims of the scandal the justice that they deserve. We are clear there's agreement across this House that this exceptional legislation does not set a precedent, and I hope, especially with the reassurance provided by Government's Amendment 25 and 45, my Right Honourable Learned Friend will withdraw Amendment 71.
I'm grateful to the Minister of I understand where he's coming from. Of course they provide a deal of reassurance on the point, but I just wanted to test a little. Are we really assuming that it will be necessary to leave it open-ended for people coming forward to seek to have their convictions quashed? After all, there is provision, if they can't reasonably be traced, for the Secretary of State then to notify an appropriate person. For example, if you can't find the person, or their next of kin if they're dead, and then there's a catch-all provision to notify an appropriate person. One assumes that includes why does that not include the criminal records bodies, that they would be notified anyway? So I'm just wondering why you have to leave it open-ended to that extent. There'll come a point when it has been exhausted. That's all I'm just interested in. How does he envisage that process actually working, of people making sure they have a document, they have something, if need be, that shows their conviction is quashed, if they need a visa, if they need a work permit, how it deals with the DBA checks and so on?
Well, as I said before, the legislation itself expires on the day this is brought into effect in terms of what it does. What he's talking about is the ongoing marking of the records of those people that may come forward at a future date. We don't know what that date would be. I'm very happy to have a conversation with him about what cut-off that would be, but in terms of the effects of this legislation, in terms of quashing convictions, it expires on the day the legislation it receives royal assent.
I understand that. And I consider my Honourable friend's point there, hence his two amendments. But the point I'm making is he prays in aid as another reason for not having a sound clause, the provisions about notification of people and they're applying to have the convictions quashed. I'm just wondering what is the mechanism to make sure that that isn't hanging around indefinitely, because we will want eventually to bring this to a conclusion, not only in terms of getting the convictions quashed, but quite separately about the payout of the compensation fund. Because one day, all the compensation that can be claimed will have been claimed. What do we then do? How do we then wrap up the process is what it comes down to.
Well, I say happy to have a continued conversation with on that particular point, but it would be a serious injustice, I feel, if we set, say, a 3-year cut-off period for that, and then somebody came along a day after that. I mean, those are the kind of challenges we've got to meet in terms of deciding how we might do that. So, very happy to continue the conversation with him, if I may. Yeah.
But I mean, in a way, this is at the core of the debate about where the four corners of this bill should stretch, because the Right Honourable Gentleman makes a very good point that there should be a sunset at some point on such an unprecedented piece of legislation. But at the moment, there are no limits to its expansiveness in terms of time. But there is a limit that the Minister has set in terms of the expansiveness, in terms of the individuals who are involved, because he's ruling out those who have gone through a Court of Appeal case. And so I think the House actually would benefit from further discussion, perhaps in the other place, about precisely where the four corners should be pinned down.
And I'd welcome that discussion. I'll follow it closely as it goes to the other place. I think the controversial part of this bill, and of course this is unprecedented, it's an exceptional piece of legislation, but the controversial element of it is the overturning of the convictions themselves. That's what we're doing, the interference we have with the courts, the way we're legislating in this way. That expires on day one. All that happens further on from that is the marking of the records. To me, that's not the controversial part of it. The controversial part is the interference with the court. So, but again, very happy to have a continued conversation with him. Rosie, new clause 7 in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Orkney and Shetland would require the establishment of an independent intermediary body to administer financial redress to individuals whose convictions are quashed by this bill. I also acknowledge the Business and Trade Committee's recommendation on a similar point. Can I assure the committee that we are building independence into the process of making financial redress? Final decisions will, if necessary, be made by an independent panel comprising a KC, an accountant and a retail expert. We will have a case manager who will ensure cases are being settled fairly, swiftly and in a non-adversarial manner. I've been clear throughout my work on putting the victims of the scandal back in the position they would have been in, and that we should move as quickly as possible. It would take months, we feel, to set up an independent intermediary, and it would add additional steps to the process and risk creating unnecessary bureaucracy. And I can see he's ready to intervene on me, so I'll give way.
I can help the Minister here. If my amendment had been selected for debate, I would probably have been seeking leave to withdraw it. But in the absence of that, I'm not really in a position to do anything more. But I thank the Minister for his assurances with regard to independence.
Just say that as the amendment wasn't selected, we probably shouldn't be discussing it. Minister.
My apologies, Dame Rosie. I will move on with pleasure on that particular point. Penultimately, Dame Rosie, we can bring ourselves to Amendment New Clause 6 in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Durham North. Can I thank him again for all his work in seeking justice for former sub-postmasters and indeed on the Horizon Compensation Advisory Board. My officials have been working closely with him, as I have also, of course. He'll be aware that we have set in train a process of appointing an independent forensic investigator to look into the capture software and how the Post Office addressed concerns about it, and this obviously relates to my friend who's no longer in her place. This follows on from a useful meeting that he and I had with one postmaster and his wife who wanted to talk to me about his experiences. My officials have spoken to other affected postmasters too. The amendment would require the Secretary of State to make a statement within 30 days of royal assent. As the committee knows, we are aiming to complete the passage of the bill very quickly, so a statement may be due quite soon. In practice, we feel it will be too soon. Time is needed to identify and appoint the right person for this role, and the investigators to complete their work and offer an independent conclusion. I'm happy, however, to promise two things. First, once the investigator has reported, I will certainly make a statement to the House. Second, as the work progresses, I'll continue to engage fully with my Right Honourable Member for North Durham and his advisory board colleagues, and I hope this will encourage the Right Honourable Member to withdraw his amendment. Finally, Dame Rosie, I come to Amendment 70, again in the name of the Right Honourable Member for Durham North. I'm happy to reassure him that the current scope of the bill includes a pathway system, which was a pilot for Horizon. The conditions in Clause 2, which determine which convictions will be overturned by the bill, were drafted with this in mind. Condition A in Clause 2, brackets 2, specify the dates during which an alleged offence was committed. They are deliberately aligned with the rollout of pathway, which we understand from the Post Office to have begun on the 23rd of September 1996. Condition E in Clause 2, bracket 6, provides that the Horizon system must have been in use at the Post Office concerned. Clause 8 defines the Horizon system as any version other than the current one, HNG-A. It follows that as a pilot, an earlier version of Horizon pathway is covered. Hence, we are clear that the bill already caters for pathway and changes to the drafting are not necessary, and I hope the Right Honourable Member is content to withdraw the Amendment 70. Can I thank you Dame Rosie. With that, I beg to move the government amendments in the name of the Secretary of State. Oh, I'm very happy to give way before I conclude.
You've got the bill as the date of the 23rd of September 1996 in clause 2 and section sub 2. Is he saying then that any ICL pathway which was installed in post offices, even prior to that, would actually be captured by this this bill?
Well, certainly, if we regard it as a pilot scheme, a pilot system of Horizon, that would be the case. The way that amendment is drafted, I can see he's getting at something that probably not addressing.
It is irrelevant then, is it? Because the fact of it is, I know one case, at least I've spoken to him, where the prosecution might have been 96, but there's evidence that the pathway system was actually in place before that 1996 date.
Well, that's not as we understand from the Post Office, but very happy to continue our discussions as we always do in terms of making sure everybody relevant that was affected by the Horizon or its pilot systems is covered. So happy to continue our discussions in that regard. So can I thank you, Dame Rosie. With that, I beg to move the government amendments in the name of the Secretary of State.
The question is that Amendment 25 be made. Before I call the next speaker, just a reminder that this debate does have to finish at 9 o'clock. I know some of the points are very detailed, but I'm just conscious that I've got the 4 speakers who've stood and the opposition front bench to bring in as well. So if colleagues could bear that in mind, because I can't impose a time limit, so it's about making sure that everybody gets the chance to get in. Liam Byrne.
Privileged to serve under your chairmanship this afternoon. I am going to be very brief because some of the points that I've made have been covered through interventions with the Minister. But let me start where he started. Since this bill has been published, good progress has been made, and that is a testament to his leadership and to the support of his officials. And as my right honourable friend, the member for Durham North, said, the more that we have heard in the inquiry, but also through the media, since this bill has been published, I think the more horrified that we have become and the more determined we have become across this House to hold individuals, including the former Chief Executive of the Post Office, to account. I think it is pretty clear to many of us on the committee that the evidence that she gave to the committee on the 3rd of February 2015 and on the 24th of June 2020 has been flatly contradicted by the revelations from Channel 4 that were published on the 27th of March, and I hope that the committee will be able to bring options for the House to consider as quickly as possible. So I just want to touch on 3 points very quickly. One is about the speed of redress, one is the stress of redress, and third is the scope of this scheme. And the point about speed really is lit up by a single fact, Dame Rosie. The total budget for compensation is about 1.2 billion. As of last Wednesday, 196 million has been paid out. The implication of that is that 80% of the budget for compensation has not been paid out. After all of this time, after all of the heartbreak, after all of the trauma, after all of the scandal, 80% of the budget for redress has still not been paid out. Now, this bill will correct that imbalance, I think, pretty substantially. I think about £780 million of the budget is earmarked for overturned convictions, and this bill does allow us to move that money much faster. But I suppose I remain concerned by what the Minister said today about the lack of any service-level agreements for paying money out for the overturned conviction scheme. I would have expected a timetable for paying out that redress alongside this bill today. And the reason that we should be concerned about this is that the track record of making payments is not good. If we look, for example, at those claims in the Horizon shortfall scheme, of those that submitted by the original deadline in November 2020, it's 3.5 years ago, 362 people have still not been paid. That is a sixth of applicants. If we look at the late claims, or 667 of them, 3/4 of them have not been paid. And so that's why the Select Committee looked quite hard at how we could introduce some strictures to ensure that people were paid much faster. Now, since then, my right honourable friend, the member for Durham North, who has got more experience in this House than pretty much anybody else, and indeed the Minister, raised some concerns, serious concerns, wise concerns about the risks of putting a legally binding deadline on the entire timetable. And I've listened to those concerns with some care, which is why the way that this amendment has been drafted is to take aim at one particular part of the process, and that is that time frame between a legitimate claim being submitted and a first offer being made. The Minister's target is for 4 weeks. We're getting quite close to that now, but the reality is that we have still got a significant number of people that are not being paid within that time frame. And indeed, in some of the anonymised evidence that the Minister provided to the committee, we can see that 13% of those claimants in the GLO scheme, for example, are waiting more than 40 days. 2% are waiting more than 100 days. So if the amendments, as I have drafted them, are not right, if they still run risks, then my appeal is to the other place to work harder on this to ensure that there is some kind of legally binding stricture on the department that means that when, God forbid, the Minister is no longer in this position and we don't have his emollients and tenacity to rely on, whoever is his successor is actually bound by some kind of time frame that ensures we're not still having this debate in years to come. Now, just to check the point, I contacted a number of witnesses to the Select Committee this morning, and actually there was some evidence that the speed of claims was improving, but there were also new issues that were emerging. So I'm told that the time taken to table a second offer when the first offer is rejected is frankly not fast enough. There have been delays of up to 3 months or more in offering dates for remediation hearings. So the process is still running too slow. And so if I have failed to persuade the House today, I appeal to the other place in helping us find some legal mechanisms to ensure that there is a stiffer timetable that the department must adhere to. The second point then is about the stress that many people will face when they're putting claims in. Many people will not put claims in because legal assistance is not available before the claim is submitted. There are many people, like Christopher Head, for example, who are going out of their way to provide pro bono assistance to people in putting claims together. But very often it will take hours and hours and hours of work to get a claim form in, and many people simply will not be up for that. They don't have the patience, and frankly, they want to put this behind them. They certainly won't have the legal assistance available to them. And that is why I hope the department will consider on publishing some kind of tariff to help people ensure that they are claiming for the full amount. Now, I know the Minister may well say that there is a risk that people will then underclaim. Having checked that with some of the lawyers this morning, their response was, I'm afraid, Dame Rosie, expressed in rather unparliamentary language, but the upshot of that was that such an objection was utter nonsense. And so there, I know, is a lot of thought going on in the department about the way to do this. I welcome the letter from the Post Office publishing average offers around the heads of loss that have been set out. There will obviously be bandings that are more appropriate, and perhaps that is a way to publish them. There is obviously a judgment that the department is relying on in the Dyson judgment and the neutral evaluation, which is not publicly available for good reason. But my plea to the Minister is let's try and make it much clearer to claimants as to what is the full measure of redress that they should have available. And if there are issues in people needing extra help before the claim form is put in, then please let us make sure that that help is available right at the beginning of the stage and not simply made available once the claim is in and a contest is underway about what should actually be paid. The final point, Dame Rosie, is then about scope, which we have already got into. I do think that there is a case for the government thinking again about those cases which have already gone to the Court of Appeal and were refused or indeed were not given leave to appeal. And the best evidence for this, I'm afraid, is the Chair of the Justice Committee's excellent letter. But I think the point that he makes in his letter, where he says the bill is in effect treating cases where the CCRC had credible evidence that Horizon data may have been essential to the prosecution case less favourably than those that the CCRC considered have no credible evidence and therefore no basis on which to refer to the Court of Appeal, is extremely important. I can see what the Minister is trying to do. He is conjuring here with very radical legal remedies. That is not something that we want to be expansive. But the risk is that we leave an injustice, frankly, that takes years and years to work through. Now, he has addressed some of the points that the Chair of the Justice Committee made in his letter, but he has not addressed that point in writing. And I think that the objection and the goal of my amendments still stand. And so I will withdraw these amendments this evening, Dame Rosie, because we're trying to maximise the spirit of collegiate working here. And I accept that the amendments that I put forward, particularly around speed, may not yet be at that state of perfection that it would satisfy all sides of the House, especially those with more experience of working on these cases than I have. But the problem is there. People are not being paid fast enough. They are not being supplied with the right amount of information up front at the beginning of their claim, and I think the scope of this bill has been drawn too narrowly. And so I look forward to working with the other place in order to try and get amendments in place which can improve this bill and command the consent on all sides of the House.
Sir Robert Neal.
Thank you very much, Dame Rosie. I too hope that I can be brief because we've covered a deal of the ground in the interventions. But can I just make a few short additional points to those which have already been ventilated? They're all contained in the transcript of the evidence of the Justice Committee's hearing, with 4 very distinguished witnesses, 3 senior academic lawyers, and in Mr Rosenberg, KC, arguably the most distinguished legal journalist of recent times. Interestingly, perhaps the government will take some comfort from the thought that 3 of those distinguished witnesses actually were prepared, despite some of my misgivings, to say that this may be the least worst way of dealing with the position. But equally, all of them thought there were more things that need to be done with the bill, and that's what I would ask the Minister to bear in mind. One short point, and I have done it, endeavoured to set out, I'm grateful to the Right Honourable Gentleman Member for Hodghill in referring to the letter which I wrote to the Secretary of State on the 24th of April. It broadly encompasses of what I think are the key points, and I do hope perhaps the Secretary of State will be able to respond to me in writing so that we can then publish that in addition to the transcript of our evidence and the letter for completeness for the record before this bill goes to the other House. The other issues that we flogged up, one is a small but perhaps important one, Dame Rosie, relates to the situation in relation to the conditions that must be met before the conviction can be potentially quashed. In particular, condition D in clause 2.5, clause 2, subclause 5, requires the offence to have been committed in connection with carrying on or working for the purposes of post office business. Now, I know that the government statement says it's intended that all the provisions of the bill should be unambiguous. Certainly, the debate that we had in the Justice Committee suggests that there is some potential ambiguity there. For example, the position of a post office worker who, during the course of the operation of the Horizon system, steals theft, is convicted of theft for stock for personal gain. Now, is that within the scope or is it not? It's not in relation to a deficiency. What it means is, in reality, this. The Secretary of State will have to be advised by officials perfectly properly as to whether any individual case comes within the scope of the scheme, whether it therefore comes within the scope of the requirements of Clause 4. So some judgment will have to be made, and be interested to know what that basis will be. And in particular, if the advice is that the particular individual's case, that conviction, does not meet the statutory conditions, and therefore the Secretary of State does not notify the convicting court of the details of the conviction and it being quashed, will there be a mechanism for anyone affected by that to seek a reconsideration? First point. That's relevant perhaps because in some cases those convictions may have been done on the basis of a guilty plea, perhaps in the magistrate's court, and we do not know necessarily what the factual basis in the magistrate's court of the guilty plea will be, because unlike the Crown Court, they will not necessarily be recorded in the transcript. It's a small but technical point, but if we are going to do an expansive approach, perhaps that can be looked at as the bill makes progress. It doesn't alter the basic principle, but it might just prevent any unintended injustice arising. Secondly, we've talked already about the position of convictions which have gone to the Court of Appeal. As I say, I have, on the basis of the evidence I heard, rather shifted my ground. But my initial response is to be as restrictive as possible in interfering with decisions of the courts. And I think as a principle that's right. But once we have gone to the extent that we have, as a matter of policy in this House, to adopt a more expansive approach, I think there is a potential risk of injustice for that comparatively small but important number of people whose cases were considered by the courts but were rejected. And I think the difference in the test between the scheme of this bill and the test that was set out by the Court of Appeal in the case of Hamilton and others and subsequent litigation is really important. Because the Court of Appeal there was adopting what was a fairly classic construction, a fairly restrictive construction, as to whether or not the conviction was essential. The horizon evidence was essential to the conviction. As we've already said, this House has decided to take a more expansive approach in what it conceives to be the broader public interest. Now, if that's the case, there are some technical issues that may arise from cases going to the Court of Appeal that are not, I think, fully captured. Of course, I give way to the Chairman of the Business.
I'm grateful to the Chairman of the Justice Committee who's making a brilliant speech. The Minister characterised the decision and the conundrum here as a legal conundrum, but in a way it is in fact a political conundrum, because we are taking a political decision about where the scope of the scheme should start and where it should stop. Does he have any insight into how long it might take those who are currently left out of the scheme to secure justice if we don't amend this bill to improve the scope as it is?
I'm grateful to the right honourable gentleman. He is right about the policy choice that ultimately gives rise to this, and I pray in there, very briefly, a quotation from Dr. Hannah Quirk, who was, of all the witnesses who gave evidence to us, the person who was most sceptical of the scheme behind the bill. But she conceded that if you are going to go down the route of the bill, she said this: if we are taking an expansive approach, it seems unfair to exclude them. That is to say, people whose cases have gone to the Court of Appeal. The Court of Appeal might have been applying different criteria at that stage. The full extent of the scandal had not yet come to light. I think that's an important point to bear in mind. The Court of Appeal would be considering a mixture of evidence and law at that stage. Professor Chalmers, who has been referred... Can I just make this point, then I'll give way? Professor Chalmers, who's also been referred to, said, quotes, "I obviously think it is unreasonable. I could certainly see the cases for Hamilton onwards, but if someone had appealed at the time, when the problems with Horizon were not documented, it seems to me entirely unfair to exclude them from the Act on that basis." I'll give way.
Very grateful for the right to give him way. But would he also agree with me that much has come out since those cases were looked at? Because particularly in the public inquiry, what clearly came out, for example, in the evidence around the way the Post Office investigated these cases, is it was a textbook case done every single time, an aggressive style. So each one was, and that was the way the Post Office did them, which did have an impact in terms of how, in some cases, postmasters pleaded guilty when they weren't, and also in the way in which they were ranged in some cases to the court.
I think the right honourable gentleman makes a perfectly fair point, and that's why I do hope we can find a formula of perhaps revisiting this as the bill makes progress. I don't think actually, given the expansive policy decision that this House has taken, any great extra constitutional outrage is caused by including those who have been to the Court of Appeal within scope, given, I think, the factual... It's rather Keynes, isn't it? You know, what do you do when the facts change? I change my opinion, sir. And I think the facts, as the right honourable member for North Durham points out, may well have changed. Now, it may be that there is an alternative formulation to that set forth in Amendment 1 that can be done. It might be, perhaps, that a provision could be put in the bill, and I'm thinking almost de Benesse at the moment, a provision put in the bill when it goes to the other house that would automatically mandate the Criminal Cases Review Commission to refer those cases. Because at the moment, it requires someone going to the CCRC and seeking them to reopen their case and apply to the Court of Appeal for leave to appeal out of time if it has been dismissed, and it then being reconsidered. I've no doubt, as the Lady Chief Justice said in evidence to the Select Committee, that the Court of Appeal will move swiftly if that were to occur. Very swiftly indeed. She's made that very clear. But there has to be a trigger mechanism at the moment, which is absent. The current working processes of the CCRC, to come back to the Right Honourable Member for Hodge Hill's point, could not guarantee speed at the moment. So perhaps some provision that mandated them to refer it swiftly might be a means of achieving justice without upsetting any more constitutional apple carts. And perhaps that's the sort of discussion that we could usefully have as the bill goes forward. And a point that links to that is, what about the position of someone who has appealed? Because I noticed, looking at the provisions of Clause 3, the various circumstances in determining when a conviction has been considered by the Court of Appeal. Clause 3, subclause 4A says a single judge of the Court of Appeal has refused to give leave to an appeal against the conviction, and that's not been leave hasn't been given by the full court. Thereafter, you can appeal the single judge's leave to the full court. That doesn't always happen. But the point to make there is, in some cases, we don't know, but the suspicion was quite strongly raised by the witnesses to the Justice Committee. It may be that the single judge refused leave simply on the grounds that the appeal was out of time, because there are strict time limits on bringing an appeal. If that were the case, the single judge and the full court, therefore, because it never got to the full court, would never have considered the merits. Leave would have been refused purely on the basis that technically you're out of time and there was no evidence put forward to justify at that stage why there should be a grantee of leave to go beyond time. Again, perhaps because the full facts of the scandal were not yet known. So that's an anomaly that I would hope surely could be addressed without too much difficulty. So I hope, Dame Rosie, looking at those matters, there are, Dame Eleanor, there are constructive things that can still be done with this bill to improve it on the margins, as I think rightly the Right Honourable Member for Hodge Hill said, to get the shape of the bill into proper form going forward. So I won't press my Amendment 70, of course, at the end of the day today, because we want to take things forward constructively. But I hope the Minister, in the exceptionally helpful spirit that he's adopted throughout, will continue to engage with us, those of us who, whatever our misgivings, realise that this is a route that the House has chosen to take, and we want to get it working to the best possible extent for those who have been affected by it, what is a horrendous scandal, and which is going to, I think, lead to ramifications in terms of the prosecutorial process, the disclosure process, and many other things beyond this.
Gavin Jones.
Dame Eleanor. First of all, can I declare my interest as a member of the Horizon Advisory Board and actually take some responsibility why we're here today, because it was the Advisory Board that recommended this course of action, but it was actually down to the tenacity of the Minister and the law officers who you worked very closely with to why we came up with this suggestion. When it was first mooted at the Advisory Board, we thought this possibly would not be acceptable to government, but the persuasive powers of the Minister, which I've come to admire, clearly worked his magic within government. But it was the only way forward, in the sense of that a lot of these individuals would never come forward without this approach, which the Right Honourable Member for Bromley Chisholm said is a unique situation in terms of addressing this issue. Can I also put on record that I am pleased that the Northern Ireland cases have been included in the scope of this legislation. There are a small number, but it would have been wrong, I think, to have those cases held up through no fault of their own because of the way in which consultation, for example, would have taken place. And again, I think congratulating all parties in Northern Ireland for how they've come together to argue in a united position for those victims. Now, can I first of all refer to Amendment 70 and the concern the ICL pathway? And the reason why I put this down, and the Minister did give some assurance in his response, was this, is the ICL pathway was introduced in September, in 1996, and what the purpose of my amendment was really just to get some clarification on this, because in terms of, it was a standalone pilot, but the legislation refers to a Horizon pilot. I'm quite convinced of what the Minister has assured us, that it will be in scope of these legislation. That is important because there are a number of individuals, certainly in the north east of England, that use the Horizon pilot, the ICL pathway, which wasn't called Horizon pilot at that stage, that were subsequently prosecuted and will be brought into the remit of this bill, and that's important. And it is very different to the next thing we'll talk about, which is capture. So I think I have assurance of what the Minister's saying is that those ICL pathway cases will be included within this bill. And that's important because it will make sure that I know at least one individual that I've met who originally thought they were not included in this will be. Can I now move on to new clause 6 on the capture cases? The Minister will not be surprised that I've actually brought this forward because as the anorak I am in terms of the Horizon scandal, I think we've discovered, potentially another scandal which predates Horizon. And for the benefit of the House, I just want to give a little bit of background to it. As the Minister said earlier on, capture was very much different to Horizon. It was developed by the Post Office itself from 1992 onwards, and it was not a linked system. It wasn't a system like Horizon, which was a networked system. It was a system which was actually sold and developed by the Post Office themselves, and sold as producing a quick way of producing cash accounts quickly and accurately. It was a desk-based, a computer-based system, but was not networked. But it's quite clear there were huge troubles with it in terms of it generating shortfalls. And with each upgrade of the software, bugs seem to have grown on this system. And according to analysis being done on the upgrades, Post have identified at least 123 bugs that existed within the capture software. And how it came to be, Dame Eleanor, was that once we had the publicity around the Horizon scandal, a lot of people came forward, including one that I went to visit in the North East, who told me and described exactly what had gone on in terms of that individual's experience at the Post Office. And I thought, well, this is an Horizon case. It involves a computer, it involves the aggressive nature in which the Post Office prosecuted that individual. But it was only when I looked at the dates didn't match up. It couldn't be Horizon, it couldn't be ICL Pathway, it was before that. And it was when it was described the way it was. But since then, 35 individuals, I think 36 have just come forward today, because I think the right honourable member for Chelmsford raised a case that she's got. And we are talking about a long time ago here, so a lot of these individuals will have sadly passed away. But there are increasingly people out there. I received one this week from the other side of the world. Somebody moved away from from this country because of being made bankrupt by the Post Office. Now, the scandal about this is they actually knew about the problems with the system, because very helpfully, I'll come on to how I've discovered all this, and I think the Minister realised I've got more now than the Post Office even have in terms of evidence behind this scheme. They were very helpfully sending newsletters around explaining and pointing out to people that there were bugs in the system. Now, you'd have thought that would have rung alarm bells in the Post Office to say, well, when we get a shortfall at a post office using capture, they shouldn't really prosecute people. Well, they didn't. They carried on doing it. They even sent a letter out in 1999 to the North East postmasters claiming that nearly over 100 have been prosecuted for false accounting over the last 6 years. But again, no one seemed to ring an alarm bell in the post office. Why suddenly they've got all these kleptomaniacs working for the post office? But again, the way in which they investigated them, we've seen now at the Horizon public inquiry, it was the same aggressive approach in terms of audit and arguing that the computer couldn't be wrong. Now I want to raise the individual case of June Tooby from Bishop Auckland in the North East. In 1999, she was suspended after a shortfall was discovered in her accounts, and her contract was terminated. It went to court, and in court, she raised the possibility that the capture system could be blamed for the post office's the actual shortfalls in the post office, in the sub-post office. Post office lawyers argued that this couldn't be the case, and actually I quote directly, said, "I've no reason to believe the computer system was faulty." And again, this comes to the point about judges in all these things, including the Horizon cases. And I don't attack judges, I'm not one that's suggesting it. But in this case, the judge just accepted that and was poo-pooed and said, well, no, the computer is always right. It clearly was not. And that the other thing is that the post office said is they'd never seen these faults. These faults seem to be occurring. Now, sadly, June died in 2020, but I've got to say she's still with us because she's a remarkable woman, and she's remarkable. I'd love to have met her. Kept everything. Kept not only the full transcripts of her trial, full transcripts of her interviews with the post office investigators, including she taped and transcribed the tapes of the telephone conversations she had with the post office, and more important, she kept the discs, the old floppy discs, which and all the operating manuals to go with the capture system. So basically, what we have is a full example of a capture case, and how it was prosecuted, including the evidence, something the post office have not got. And can I pay tribute to Ken Tooby and Vivian, her niece, who have kept all this and very helpfully supplied it to me. It came in large boxes, and it's taken a long time to go through it. And can I just pay tribute to my assistant Ryan Jackson, who spent a long time going through and reading all this and differentiating what was relevant and what wasn't relevant. But we've now been working with Simon Ricaldo from the post office, and we've passed this on to the department, and copies now, I think, have got all the information. But it is a full case, and I don't think the post office have got anything really compared to this. But what it has allowed us to do, I think, is then to look at not only that if you'd change the name of this on these documents to Horizon, it's a mirror image of a Horizon case. The prosecution way in which they did the prosecutions, the dismissing the fact that the computer system could not be wrong. And I'm pleased, working with the Minister's officials and himself, that he's now agreed to have an independent expert look at these discs and the evidence to clarify what was happened. Steve Marston and Steve Lewis, who are two other individuals that have come forward and have been helpful, certainly Steve Marston, in terms of trying to recreate the problems, which was showing that the floppy disks do create problems. Now, this was rolled out, like I say, nearly 30 years ago. Many people will have passed away, and it is important, I think, we do get justice for these. Now, I did suggest to the Minister that we could perhaps include these individuals for exoneration in this legislation. I accept from him why he can't do that, but I think it is important that once we do get clarification, if we can get independent expert advice that the computer system is wrong and the other evidence that's produced, if that's done before this bill is passed through the other place, we could perhaps add capture to this case, but that's obviously, and he's right, we've got to have that independent verification of that. But if it's not possible, we'll then have to find some other mechanism, which I think is fair to him, he is committed to looking at, of how we get justice for these individuals. There may well be other individuals out there not yet come forward, and as I say, the Rutherglen member for Chelmsford just raised a case, so I would appeal to anybody out there that thinks they were involved in the capture system to please come forward. And if any honourable Rutherglen members have got cases, please feed them through to myself. This bill is a unusual bill, as the Rutherglen member for Bromley Chislehurst said, but I think it's got the balance right. My honourable friend, the chair of the Select Committee, realises my reservations about putting time limits on compensation, because having sat on the advisory board and seen the difficulty in dealing with some of these cases, I think the Minister, to his credit, has cut through by offering the fixed sum awards, which has helped, I think, move on some of the cases very quickly. But some, just by their nature, are going to be very difficult. And I don't think anyone wants them to go on longer than they should. But I think some of the proposals, which I think he's going to announce following our last board meeting of last week, will help, I think, speed up that process. Just finally, Dame Milner, can I talk about the issue around the Court of Appeal cases? I do understand the nervousness of why these are not included in this bill, but we do need to find a mechanism for dealing with these cases, because quite clearly I think what's come out of the inquiry in the last few weeks, evidence that now wasn't in the public domain, possibly wasn't available to people when they brought their cases forward. And I think I accept that the judiciary perhaps, or some parts of the judiciary would say, feel nervous about this approach. I think we do need to, the Minister and I think the Justice Select Committee and the Business Select Committee do need to sit down, I think, with government law officers to look at ways in which we can at least look at some of these cases. Because I think once the inquiry is complete, we'll have a full picture, I think, of not only in terms of the investigatory side, but the decision-making process, which I've got to say this last week from senior people in the post office seems to be they can't remember, but that is no defence. I think it's important that we do not forget about these cases. So with that, I will withdraw. I'm not pressing my amendments to the vote, but hopefully we can ensure that we not only get justice for the individuals of Horizon, but the others of capture that fall outside of the scope of this bill at the moment.
Ian Paisley.
Thank you, dear Milner. Like other members, I won't be speaking for very long. Only in this instance, I actually mean that. And I do want to speak to new clause 1, standing in my colleagues' names, and new clause 3 and new clause 2, standing in the name of the Secretary of State and my colleagues also. The Minister is really going to have an opportunity to dine out on the thank yous and gratitude that he has got. But I must say, it's not made lightly. The Minister has done something which the public constantly tell us is absent in this place, and he's shown honour. He's been completely honourable with the people of Northern Ireland in this matter. Whenever my colleague from East Antrim, my colleague from East Belfast raised this matter first in the Chamber, consistently made the point, would you please ensure that Northern Ireland is included? And from day one, Dame Milner, the Minister was consistent saying that he was going to use his best endeavours to do that. Now, sometimes we hear those words, best endeavours to do that, and it's only acknowledged in the breach. But the Minister was absolutely clear that he was going to do that, and every effort was used. There was ups and downs in this process, but every effort was used to make sure that cross-party, cross-ministerial, cross-legal jurisdiction, the consistent message came back to the Minister that this is the way to resolve this issue, and accepting the instruction this evening was a clear indication that that was going to happen. And with regards to the motion, or the new clause tabled, new clause 1, it now is superfluous to requirements. It's no longer required. It's been incorporated in the government's own new clauses, and we welcome that and we thank them for that. And the sub-postmasters across Northern Ireland this evening will know that they're being treated exactly the same, and with the same opportunity for fairness and the same opportunity to have compensation as their colleagues here in England and Wales. Can I take the opportunity to thank the Clerk's Office, Dame Eleanor? I hope that's not inappropriate, but I really do want to draw attention to the fact how, quite frankly, brilliant they are in helping us to make sure that these things were drafted correctly, to again make it then easier for the government's team to then accept what we had put on the order paper. And without their help, this wouldn't have been as successful, and I think it's only appropriate that we do that. I know from speaking to some of the victims in this, they're extremely grateful. They were wound up a little bit by time to time from the media, who told them, oh, Northern Ireland's been excluded, you're not going to get it, even after we had the commitment from the Minister. Oh, you're not going to get it. The media wanted to wind that a little. Thankfully tonight, those postmasters in Northern Ireland will see justice. And so, Minister, thank you for that, and I will therefore not be moving new clause 1 in my name.
Thank you. Shadow Minister Rushanara Ali.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. It cannot be repeated often enough that the Horizon scandal remains one of the greatest miscarriages of justice our nation has experienced. It is a scandal characterised by abuse of power, the mistreatment of innocent people, and the wholesale failure of the entire system. We might blame it on the failure of IT, but that's not the whole story. It's a human failure on a grand scale, a failure to listen, a failure to learn, a failure by the powerful to listen to sub-postmasters. And the catastrophic cost has been in reputation, in income, and in the suffering by hard-working, innocent sub-postmasters and their loved ones. Sub-postmasters are people we rely on at the heart of our communities, the people who serve us and help us and hold our communities together. Indeed, without the tireless campaigning of people such as Alan Bates and the relentless work of parliamentarians across the House, and the work of journalists and filmmakers, perhaps justice would never have been done. And to them I pay tribute, and I also extend my gratitude to the Minister for the work he's done both in the front bench as well as back bench. We've heard horrific stories of sub-postmasters who took their own lives because of the suffering, the stories of shame, of pain, of suffering by the sub-postmasters themselves as well as their families and friends. Dame Eleanor, we support this unprecedented bill. We believe it must pass into law with the necessary urgency as given the gravity of the situation. And as has already been said, and I would like to further stress, it is a crucial bill. It is crucial that this bill does not set a precedent and is an exception. We must, as has been stated, understand the weight of this so that such action is never ever even considered again. The legal solution of this bill is a wholly exceptional and isolated case where these necessary actions will be taken to match an unprecedented miscarriage of justice, both in scale and impact. It must not set a precedent. We welcome the inclusion of Northern Ireland in the territorial scope of the bill, and I thank the Minister for listening to the representations across the board in terms of getting the Northern Ireland element into the bill. I know it will be a significant relief for the 27 sub-postmasters in Northern Ireland who are wrongly convicted. And As for the amendments that have been laid by my honourable friend, the member for Birmingham and Hodge Hill, which he has spoken to, he raises important points in his amendments, which sought to clarify the position of those exonerated in regards to compensation and the expediting process. Of course, a quashing of their convictions must be swiftly followed by further compensation for the victims of this scandal. It would surely rub salt in the wounds to quash a conviction after all these years and then see delays in the payment and compensation beyond a reasonable time. And given everything that has happened, it is right that the Minister is in a position, is able to set out explicitly in more detail to ensure that the compensation is delivered swiftly and without further delay. And my right honourable friend has set out very clearly the reasons behind the amendment that he tabled, which is agreed to withdraw. But the substance of what he's saying is important, and I very much hope that the Minister will heed some of the points that he's made. As we acknowledge, there are, of course, complex cases in the exoneration process, and we do not want to see deadlines that may cause unintended consequences, and my right honourable friend acknowledges that. But we must act with urgency and speed to ensure delay has no further part in this already long process that has caused so much suffering to victims. As the inquiry, and also Dame Eleanor, as the inquiry rolls on, more and more horrifying stories are emerging. More stories of cover-up, obfuscation, dirty tricks, and a shameful culture at one of the oldest institutions. Today's legislation is seismic in what it's doing, but it's only part of the story, and I know that ministers recognise the wider work that's needed to ensure that sub-postmasters get the justice they deserve. And I wanted to touch on those wider points that I know that the Minister is thinking about and also working on to put on the record. For example, questions about the requirement to sign non-disclosure agreements that has been exposed in last week's hearing in relation to Mr. Griffiths, who tragically took his own life as a result of the pressure the Horizon scandal put on him. His widow was encouraged by the Post Office to sign an NDA. Separately, it is important that ministers think about the implications of some of those issues. There are also ongoing concerns that has been set out by my right honourable friend, the member for Durham North, in relation to capture. I welcome the clarification the Minister has made in relation to the pathways scheme in his response earlier today. But it's crucial that we ensure that action is taken, and I welcome the announcement the Minister recently made about capture, and we look forward to seeing how that progresses as speedily as possible. On Fujitsu, again, I welcome the work that the government has done to make sure that Fujitsu contributes to the compensation, and while all of this is outside of the scope of the bill, it's helpful that the government is focused on making sure Fujitsu contributes to the compensation plan, given that public money in the order of £1 billion of compensation has been committed, and Fujitsu continues to receive government contracts worth £3.4 billion since 2019. It is critical, Dame Eleanor, that the government works at pace to address the wider issues alongside today's legislation, which is vital that we support. The wider issues to ensure that the Post Office, in relation to its leadership, its management, those issues and the failures that have been exposed through this scandal, and the abuses of power are addressed. It is vital that it's fit for purpose, and we look forward to working to make sure that happens.
Minister Gavin Hollinrake.
Thank you, Dame Eleanor. If I can just tackle the points that have been raised, if I can, as briefly as possible. The Right Honourable Member, the Chair of the Select Committee, the member for Birmingham Hodge Hill, It's right to say £196 million has been paid out so far, and we do see this legislation is opening the door to a lot more compensation, and that should rapidly go out to victims of prosecutions. Also, we expect that number to lift significantly with the introduction of the fixed sum award of £75,000 for HSS claimants. So we do think that number will rise. To be clear, around 70% of claims submitted within time have been settled, full and final settlement of those individuals. So we are making progress, but we're determined to make more progress, and certainly working with the Horizon Redress Advisory Board to make sure that is the case. We are very happy to get into the weeds of this, the nitty-gritty. That's what we do on a daily basis. He talks about I might not always be the minister in charge of this particular brief, and for whatever reason that might be in the future. I am very happy to help whoever does take over this brief when that does happen, should more help be needed. Yes, we're keen to accelerate the timescales right across the piece on the GLO scheme, so we are hitting our target of 90% of offers within 40 days. First within 40 days, but we will come forward with some more service level agreements for other schemes as well, and that's something I'm very happy to work alongside him on.
I'm grateful for that reassurance. Does he think that he will have the service level agreements for the overturned conviction schemes on the table before this bill is sent for royal assent?
Minister.
Yes. In terms of tariffs, the points he makes, and we're keen to do whatever we can to make this process quicker and easier, more transparent and clearer. So again, that's something we are taking and we're looking at right now. In terms of legal advice, of course, in the Horizon Redress scheme, compensation scheme, overturned convictions compensation scheme, legal advice is available prior to the submission of a claim. As in the GLO, it's only the HSS that was seen as non-adversarial, that's where that doesn't apply prior to the offer being made, and then legal advice is available at that point. So in terms of the issue on the cases before the Court of Appeal, we are obviously keen to continue to discuss that, and we'll certainly respond to the letter from the Chair of the Justice Committee in due course. I'm
so grateful to him for taking one final intervention, but it's maybe a non-adversarial process, but it is nonetheless an intimidating process. It's a 16-page form. It's very complicated. It takes several hours to fill in, and that is the equivalent of several £1,000s worth of legal assistance. At the moment, it's being provided pro bono by those with some experience, but I do hope that this is something that he can look at again.
Perhaps just to point out the 16-page form, a lot of it is legalese. There's only about 4 pages of it. 4 pages of it is actually stuff you need to fill in. But nevertheless, we understand his point. The advisory board has made a recommendation for an independent appeals process, which we are looking at on that scheme as well. My rational friend, the member for Bromley and Chislehurst, can I thank him for his work on this, on the Justice Select Committee. I agree with him. The point is this is the least worst option. I'm glad that the legal fraternity is coming to the same opinion as us, that that's what exactly this is. We will respond to his letter the 24th of April, particularly around the Court of Appeal cases. There are 13 cases, 7 before the Court of Appeal and 6 been refused leave to appeal, but very happy to look at those cases and continue our conversations. I understand the potential injustices that might be around those cases. His point on 4B is the one that we will have a look at as well, to make sure there are unintended consequences of this particular legislation. Right Honourable Gentleman, the member for North Durham, thank you for all his work on the advisory board. He talks about my persuasive powers. I've got to say, I think the ITV series is far more persuasive than I was in terms of this particular issue, moving things on as we are today. But certainly, following his recommendations, which is before the series, we were looking at ways to try and expedite overturning of convictions, including some of the where we've got to today based on his recommendation. The capture software we are looking at, as I say, independent review. We both met with Mr and Mrs Marston, and their story was compelling, like many others. It raises the issue about the date, and the date range is in subsection 2A, and the range, on the basis of it, the offence would have to be between the 23rd of September 1996 and a later date. So if you're talking about an earlier date, that would be excluded if the offence was committed earlier date, as it's currently legislated for. So we need to have a conversation with him on that basis. But of course, the independent review should help inform our debate going forward. I think it's easier for including Horizon, of course, rather than other things that are not directly connected to Horizon, on the basis that court has upheld convictions as being safe on the basis of Horizon evidence. And that's, I think, why we're able to legislate in this way. Can I thank the honourable gentleman, the member for North Antrim, for his kind words. I think it's important to recognise that all of us actually are here to do the right thing, and it's a pleasure to have the opportunity to do so in this way. We are all doing it on a cross-party basis. We are very pleased to be able to agree with their wishes in terms of including Northern Ireland in this legislation, and particularly for the 23 postmasters in Northern Ireland that were suffered as a result of Post Office actions. And I can thank the Shadow Minister for her support and her colleagues from the front bench. Absolutely, we think Fujitsu we very keen to make sure Fujitsu does contribute, which they have agreed to do. They've got a moral obligation to do. My Secretary of State, who's been massively supportive of all my work on these particular issues, has met with the global CEO, and we expect to give more news to the House in due course. And with that, dear Eleanor, I beg to move the government amendments.
Thank you. The question is that Amendment 25 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I'll take Government Amendments 27, 26 and 28, Clause 1 together. Minister, to move formally. The question is that Amendments 27, 26 and 28 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 1 as amended stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I will take Government Amendments 29 to 33 to Clause 2 together. Minister, to move formally. The question is that Government Amendments 29 to 33 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 2 as amended stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Government Amendment 34 to Clause 3. Minister, to move formally. The question is that Government Amendment 34 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 3 as amended stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I will take Government Amendments 35 to 44 to Clause 4 together. Minister, to move formally. The question is that Government Amendments 35 to 44 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 4 as amended stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I will take Government Amendments 45 to 47 to Clause 5 together. Minister, to move formally. The question is that Government Amendments 45 to 47 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 5 as amended stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Who would have thought mine would be the longest speech of the evening? The question is that Clause 6 stand part of the bill. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I will take Government Amendments 48 to 51 to Clause 7 together. Minister, to move formally. The question is that Government Amendments 48 to 51 be made. As many as that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 7, as amended, stand part of the bill. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I will take Government Amendments 52 to 55 to Clause 8 together. Minister to move formally. The question is that Government Amendments 52 to 55 be made as mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 8 as amended stand part of the bill. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to Government Amendment 56 to Clause 9. Minister to move formally. The question is that Government Amendment 56 be made. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 9 as amended stand part of the bill. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The question is that Clause 10 stand part of the bill. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. We now come to Government New Clause 2. I call the Minister to move Government New Clause 2 formally. The question
Deletion of cautions for relevant offences, Northern Ireland.
Beg your pardon. I got so used to it, only me speaking, it didn't occur to me. The question is that Government New Clause 2 be read a second time. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Government New Clause 2 be added to the bill. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. And so we come to Government New Clause 3. I call the Minister to move Government New Clause 3 formally.
Power of Department of Justice to make further consequential provision.
The question is that Government New Clause 3 be read a second time. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. Oh, the ayes have it. The ayes have it. The question is that Government New Clause 3 be added to the bill. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. With the leave of the House, I will take Government Amendments 23 and 24 to the long title of the bill together. Minister to move formally. The question is that Government Amendments 23 and 24 be made. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. Finally, I must propose the question that I do report the bill as amended to the House. The question is that I do report the bill as amended to the House. As mayors of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. I think the ayes have it. The ayes have it. Order. 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 Whip to report.
I beg to report that the committee has gone through the bill and directed me to report the same, with amendments.
No amendments on consideration. Third reading what day?
Now.
Minister to move. Third reading. I call the Secretary of State, Kemi Bethnal.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I beg to move that the bill be now read a third time. Honourable members will need no reminder of the significance of this bill. This legislation will, I hope, bring some much-needed relief and closure to those caught up in one of the greatest miscarriages of justice in our nation's history. For the postmasters wrongly accused of, convicted and punished for crimes they never committed, this bill means hard-won exoneration, with their convictions wiped clean from the slate. A wrong is finally being put right. But as honourable members know, Madam Deputy Speaker, these postmasters will also receive the fair compensation they deserve through the Horizon Conviction Redress Scheme. This will be delivered by my department rather than the Post Office. And while the scale of the government's response in this case is extraordinary, I am keen to remind honourable members that it does not set a precedent for our involvement in other judicial matters. I know this is a sentiment which has been echoed across this House during debates on the bill. We have chosen this path because the sheer extent of the Post Office's prosecutorial misconduct is an affront to justice in and of itself. It demanded an exceptional response from government. It's why I was glad to see this bill being welcomed on all sides of the House during its second reading. There is, I believe, a unanimous consensus that the provisions of this legislation are needed to bring justice to postmasters who have suffered too much for far too long. Yes.
I'm really grateful for her for giving me on that point. I'm sorry to come in on the third reading. She's talking about justice for postmasters and mistresses, which is completely right. I just want to ask one point on the sort of policy aspect of this. The way you've had postmasters, as I had in my constituency, who've written to me, who haven't been prosecuted, but found that the Horizon system was working really quite badly, and they were having to top up out of their own money when Horizon was reporting losses that due to faults in the system, although they weren't prosecuted. Can I suggest, or can I ask, what is their redress route if they're now saying, well, I was hundreds of pounds out of pocket because I was having to make up the difference?
I thank the Honourable Gentleman for his question. The Horizon Shortfall Scheme is what we've devised to deal with those specific situations. And if he writes to the Department, we can look at some of those cases which have been brought to him as constituency MP. Madam Deputy Speaker, I know the debate to date has centred around calls to extend the bill to Northern Ireland, and the Government has been supportive of them. So in consultation with the Northern Ireland Executive, I was pleased to see the Government amendments in my name accepted by the Committee of the whole House. As a result of the House's support, postmasters in Northern Ireland who suffered the same injustices as those in the rest of the UK will now also see their good names restored with proper financial redress. As has been noted during recent debates, the speed of that redress could not be more important. Because of the Horizon scandal, people lost more than just their jobs. They were pursued for non-existent losses, they racked up legal bills, they suffered enormous financial and personal strain because of the Post Office's actions. It is therefore entirely right that victims do not wait a second longer than necessary to have that money paid back to them with interest to reflect what they have lost. I'm determined that this legislation complements the ongoing work to hasten redress across the existing schemes. Here we are already making good progress with payments allowing postmasters to finally move on with their lives. And I would like to take the opportunity to thank the opposition, especially the Honourable Member for Stalybridge and Hyde, for the constructive and supportive approach he has taken in working with the Government on this bill. And, of course, to so many members across the House who have engaged with us over and over again to deliver the right result for postmasters. I'd also like to thank the officials of both my department, Business and Trade, and the Ministry of Justice, who have been working hard behind the scenes for some time to ensure that postmasters affected by the Horizon scandal are supported and compensated fairly. But most of all, Madam Deputy Speaker, I would like to thank the Honourable Member for Thirsk and Malton for his exemplary work as Post Office Minister and in taking through not just this bill, but dealing with this issue in a very sensitive manner and helping to create confidence in the scheme. Madam Deputy Speaker, this bill is a major step forwards in that mission. After years of campaigning and fighting to clear their names, postmasters are now receiving the justice they deserve. No bill can fully undo the damage that has been done or remove the scars the Horizon scandal has left on its victims. But through this legislation, we are doing our best to right the wrongs of the past so that every postmaster caught up in this scandal can begin to rebuild their lives. I commend the bill to the House.
The question is that the bill be now read the third time. Rushanara on.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker, and I want to thank the Minister and the Secretary of State for their remarks. And today's bill has, as has been acknowledged, provides a very important step forward in bringing justice for sub-postmasters. They have suffered more than we can imagine, as the Secretary of State has pointed out. This has included unjust prison sentences, bankruptcy, ostracisation from communities, family breakdown, homelessness, and tragically, this scandal has led to some of the sub-postmasters taking their own lives. And while today by no means makes amends for what they have been through and the suffering that their families have endured, this is an important positive step. We welcome, as I've said previously, the fact that today's bill will bring particular relief for the 27 Northern Ireland cases and ensure that they receive exoneration. The many stories we've heard of those affected here in this debate today and in previous statements and debates is just a snapshot of the scale of suffering the Horizon scandal has caused. It has been a scandal defined by the abuse of power, by secrecy and delay. And we've seen, as others have seen and acknowledged, that the inquiry is revealing yet more challenges, yet more issues, whether it's to do with the cases that have been referred to today, NDAs, the speed with which actions taken, the particular abuses that we've seen, and much else. So while this bill has a particular focus, it's not going to be enough. And I welcome, as I've said earlier, I welcome the actions the Minister is taking in terms of addressing the concerns in relation to capture. I welcome the clarification he's made in relation to pathway and the assurances he's given to honourable members on both sides of the House in relation to speed of providing the compensation that's needed, but also making sure that this particular bill and the nature of this bill remains a unique provision given the unique and extraordinary situation that sub-postmasters have experienced and the injustice that they've faced. So I look forward to seeing progress. We look forward to seeing progress in terms of action that will be taken to deliver the compensation that sub-postmasters desperately need. And we look forward to working with the government to make sure that the Post Office is fit for purpose. Because, frankly, Madam Deputy Speaker, what we've seen because of this scandal, what has been uncovered over the period that the Post Office is presiding over, dealing with the implications of this scandal, has exposed major failings that we all need to address very urgently and make sure that it is an institution fit for purpose and further scandals don't hit that institution and more people do not suffer, because what we've seen does not inspire confidence and action must be taken. And I look forward to working with ministers to help achieve that. Thank you.
Alistair Carmichael.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. I too am pleased to give this bill my support and the support of my party at third reading. It shows what is possible when the House comes together and works collegiately as we have done. But it must surely remain a concern to us all that it's necessary in the first place. I pay warm tribute to the Minister for the way in which he's handled this, not just as a Minister, but in fact in his time before he came into office as well, the Right Honourable Member for Durham North, and indeed, although she's not in her place at the moment, the Honourable Lady, the Member for Motherwell and Wishaw. I would say only that I hope that now the Scottish Government will be able to bring to Parliament legislation that has been prepared so that we can all come to the same place at the same time, because the important thing here, and we have to come back to this time and again, is the outcome for the sub-postmasters themselves. For the Post Office as an institution, I think this is a very important step in terms of restoring its trust and its standing in the communities that we all represent. I leave the House with this one final thought, Madam Deputy Speaker, and it is that there's a temptation to think that when this bill passes, when its provisions are implemented, that somehow or another that's it, job done. I would caution the House against that, because in fact we're here tonight because of a head of steam that was built up, because of the nature of the Post Office as an institution, because of the standing of sub-postmasters in our communities, the sheer number and indeed the quite remarkable way in which the ITV documentary caught the mood of the nation. What happened to sub-postmasters is actually different from what happens to people all the time, only in one respect, and that is the sheer scale of it. I come across in my time as a Member of Parliament so many cases where people who have good, reasonable cases are squeezed out of what they are entitled to because of the inequality of arms, because public bodies have deep pockets, they have the taxpayer behind them every step of the way to pay for the best legal representation and to stonewall the cases where people would otherwise have good justice. I'll be back in Westminster Hall on Wednesday morning dealing with a case about the accountability of the Financial Conduct Authority, where they only acted in respect of claims made by constituents of mine who had been the victims of a Ponzi scheme, because they were eventually forced into doing it by people who were brave enough, as with the Post Office, to take their case to court. Ultimately, they lost, but in the process of taking the case to court, they put the FCA in a position where there was no alternative but to pay out all the victims through the Financial Services Compensation Scheme. But the brave 95 people who took the legal action in the first place are left £2 million out of pocket. Everybody gets something because they were brave enough to stand up, but they are the ones that are left to pay at the end of it. That might be the law, Madam Deputy Speaker, but you'll never persuade me that it's justice.
Gavin Robinson.
Thank you very much, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I, just like others who have spoken, indicate our full support for this bill at third reading. The Secretary of State was kind enough to thank the Minister, though she hasn't been present to hear all of our tributes to the Minister throughout the course of the evening, and so I do want to repeat them for her benefit. But he has been somebody who has thoughtfully and doggedly worked through the issues around the inclusion of Northern Ireland. We are incredibly grateful to your Minister, her Minister, very grateful to him. He used to sidle up to me on a weekly basis and suggest something else that I needed to do that would allow him to advance the case for inclusion. And every time I satisfied what he had asked of me, he then presented another challenge and a request that I speak with people who are really uncontactable from politicians because they're too impartial for that sort of work. But I genuinely appreciate my colleagues, and I genuinely appreciate the way in which the Minister has engaged with us. It is very clear, Madam Deputy Speaker, that tribute was paid to the Northern Ireland Executive in the way in which they have engaged in this issue, but it would be remiss of me, as our leader, not to put on record my appreciation for the work of the Right Honourable Member for East Antrim, somebody who has been taking an interest in these issues long before restoration of the Northern Ireland Executive occurred, somebody who has recognised the deep injustice that has been at the heart of the Horizon scandal, and somebody who has doggedly pursued resolution and justice for those affected in Northern Ireland, just as our friend from North Durham, the Right Honourable Member for North Durham, has always been a champion for our inclusion in this, and we are very grateful not just for his interest in us, but for his commitment to this issue over many years and the thoughtful way in which he has engaged in it. Madam Deputy Speaker, I think this does serve to prove the impact that backbenchers can have in this parliamentary process, that there is no frailty to the pursuit that we have, that though we may not have sufficiency of numbers to provide the opposition in and of ourselves, we have been able, through effective relationships, to make sure there was positive progress in this bill, but that can only work if there's reciprocation in response. And so for that, Madam Deputy Speaker, throughout the course of the last number of weeks, months and longer relationships on other issues, we are very grateful.
Kevin Jones.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. This is an historic bill. It's also a unique bill and very controversial bill. It is another small step in getting the justice for sub-postmaster campaign, which has been going on for decades now, and tribute to Alan Bates and all his campaigns. They were the people who didn't say no, wouldn't say no to people who were actually just saying go away. They kept at it, and they're the heroes in all of this. But can I also pay tribute to my fellow members of the Advisory Board, Professor Chris Hodges, Robert Moorhead, Richard Moorhead and James Arbuthnot, because we did propose this as a solution to these overturned agreements. Did we really expect that we'd actually get it accepted? No, we didn't. And I think that's down to the Minister in terms of his way. But I've also got to put on record thanks to the Attorney General and the Justice Secretary, because both of them not only engaged in the arguments, but actually saw the logic of this controversial way of doing it, but the only way of doing it. Without their help, it couldn't have been done. I would also like to put on record the long-suffering officials of the Minister, because not only do they have to put it with him, they have to put it with me and the other Advisory Board members, but they have worked tremendously hard on this. And the officials I know in the Justice Department as well. And, you know, I know we're into civil service bashing again this week. I've got to say, without them, we couldn't have got to what we've done with this bill. I hear what he says about the issues around capture, and hopefully the constructive way in which he's approaching it, we can perhaps get justice for those. But just finally, I would just like to put on record, and I think our thoughts should be with all those people who are no longer with us. People like Tom Brown, my original constituent, who got me involved in this scandal, and June Tooby, who forensic cataloguing of the Horizon case, capture case, will hopefully lead to some justice for those victims as well. This is an important step forward today, and let's hope that at least it gives some comfort to their families, knowing that their loved ones are going to be exonerated as part of this process.
Sammy Wilson.
Thank you, Madam Deputy Speaker. And can I also put on record my thanks to the Minister for the work which he has done on this. I first came across this issue when I witnessed the anger, frustration and despair from people who knew they had done no wrong, and yet they saw their reputation sullied. They lost their businesses. They had the suspicion of their friends, even of their families, and yet they felt that they were beating their head against a brick wall of bureaucracy, of people who had standing, who were believed, regardless of the evidence which mounted against the case that they were making. And I think the Minister has done a great thing in giving hope and exoneration to those people. And, you know, I know that for many of them, they felt that they were never going to get justice. And now they have found, and, you know, the Minister, I think, made it clear at the very start, because he knew about this before he took his position, that he intended to see this through. And he's used his position to do a good thing. And I think that it is important that we recognise that this place has been the vehicle by which justice has been delivered, and a committed Minister. And I think it is really important, a committed Minister who was determined that he would use his position to do what was the right thing to do for individuals. I've got to say, Madam Deputy Speaker, when the issue of Northern Ireland was first raised with the Minister, there was a reluctance. I mean, there's no doubt about it. I mean, questions I put to him on the floor here, conversations I had with him, and there were always reasons given as to why maybe it should be done in Northern Ireland. But here's a good thing. The arguments were listened to. And over a period of time, and as the member for East Belfast said, he didn't expect to just roll over. He expected us to do something as well and to make the case, and that's the job. And so I thank him that he did listen and that Northern Ireland has been included. I can also thank the clerk for the advice which he gave, because many of us are not really aware of all these parliamentary procedures, even though we've been here for I don't know how long, but you know, you don't always know exactly the best way of going about things. And the advice that was given, and also the support that was given, I think was very, very important in getting this over the line. Unfortunately, even though people will be exonerated as a result of this legislation. There are many who died with the shadow and the shame of what was done to them by people who, as this inquiry is now showing, were cynical, were manipulative, were calculating in the way in which they pursued people through the court. And I know it's not for the debate here today, but I hope that once this inquiry is over, apart from the embarrassment that some of them have had during the inquiry, where they've forgotten, or where they've shown arrogance, or where they've just claimed they were doing their job, I hope that there will be accountability for those who knowingly put people through what they were put through. And as I say, some of them died without their names ever being cleared. And that's not something that we can do. At least I hope that their families will have some reassurance from the legislation which will pass here tonight. The last thing I just want to say is this, that the exoneration, once the bill goes through, they'll be exonerated from a legal point of view, but I hope that the compensation which they're due will be paid out quickly, and that there won't be. And the Minister outlined today some of the ways in which he intends to ensure that compensation claims are dealt with quickly, and I hope that that is the case. One last point I just want to make here, and that is this. I hope that other ministers learn from this experience. Because don't forget, even when the evidence was piling up, that when it was pointed out and when ministers knew that suddenly postmasters and postmisters across the country were becoming thieves, even though they'd never done it, and yet they turned a blind eye to it, or they accepted the explanation of their officials. And as I mentioned at the very start, the frustration that people have when the power of the state denies them justice or tells them that they've done something which they know they haven't done, it causes people to have no confidence at all in government and in the institutions of government. And we could go through a number of issues here, but I look at the evidence which is building up, for example, in the loan charge. And I ask myself, in 5 years' time, are we going to find the same kind of thing? Programmes done, ministers embarrassed and not able to explain why they didn't take action when all of the evidence was there. So I hope that ministers, do take heed from this sorry tale of where they believed people who were in power rather than people who were the victims of those who were in power.
Thank you very much for giving way. I was elected in 2010. I was an MP of just a few months' standing when my constituent Seema Misra approached me saying that she had just been sentenced to jail. She was pregnant, and that sentence came down on her son's 10th birthday. With the help of James Arbuthnot, now in the other place, within a few days, I realised that there were other colleagues who had a similar case, and it did all point to the Horizon system. I wrote to the Post Office Minister at the time, and I was rebuffed, and there must have been other colleagues who did the same thing. So a backbencher of just a few months' standing was able to see right to the heart of the problem with the help of the internet and a couple of fantastic colleagues, and yet a Minister of the Crown was not. Now, ministers in our system have surgeries...
Order! This is not a second reading speech. We're at the very end, the last minute of this bill, and the honourable gentleman is making an intervention, and that was really very much a speech. We all have sympathy with the point he's making, but this is not the point in the proceedings where such points are made. I believe the member for East Antrim was just about to conclude the entire debate on the entire bill. Sammy Wilson.
And I was indeed, but I think that the intervention does show that ministers need to listen. And I pay tribute to those members, the House member from Durham across the way, who give us great support for the cause of Northern Ireland, and for others who persisted in keeping this issue raised. And I know that a lot has been said about the TV programme, but I think that even before the TV programme was played out, there was a realisation, because of the persistence of members here, that something had to be done. I'm glad it has been done, and I hope that this will be a great relief to many people who have lived under the shadow and the cloud of the things that happened to them over the last number of years.
That concludes the debate. The question is that the bill be now read the third time. As members of that opinion say aye. Aye. Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it. We now come to motion number 4 on companies, motion number 5 on sea fisheries, and motion number 6 on National Crime Agency. Minister to move.
I beg to move.
The question is, as on the order paper, as members of that opinion say aye.
Aye.
Of the contrary, no. The ayes have it. The ayes have it.